Chapter 1: The Carrion Orbit. The hum was the first thing, and the last. It was the alpha and omega of existence inside the Penumbra Facility, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the station's metal bones and into the marrow of its inhabitants. It was the sound of air scrubbers, gravity plate regulators, and the faint, ever-present strain of a structure holding back the absolute void. Kalen Jorick had learned to map his days by its subtle shifts in pitch. The morning cycle brought a slightly higher frequency as the primary life support systems engaged. The evening cycle was a deeper bass, a mechanical sigh as the station conserved power. He planted his magnetic boots to the metal floor of his cell, the clang sharp and final in the small space. A single viewport showed his only neighbor, Lament. That was the official designation for the moon they orbited. A cold, pockmarked sphere of gray rock, utterly devoid of feature or interest. It hung in the blackness, a celestial skull that never blinked. Kalen's old life, the one before the conviction, would have been consumed by such a proximity. He would have spent weeks cataloging its albedo, charting its mass concentrations, desperate to understand its secrets. Now, it was just the wall of his cage. A chime, thin and electronic, echoed down the cell block. Meal distribution. Kalen moved towards the door, the soles of his boots dragging slightly with each step. The slot in the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. A tray emerged, holding a gray, nutrient-dense paste in a recessed bowl and a bulb of recycled water. He took it without expression. It tasted of nothing, which was an improvement over its earlier iterations that tasted of despair and old vitamins. He ate standing, watching Lament. His old research papers, the ones that had cost him his freedom, had argued that Lament was an anomaly. Its gravitational pull was inconsistent with its observed mass. It had a density shadow, a core so heavy it defied conventional models. He had posited the existence of a collapsed neutronium fragment or a stable microsingularity. The corporation had called it data fabrication. They had buried his work and his career in the same deep hole. The irony of being sent to a prison orbiting the very subject of his disgrace was a form of psychological torture, so precise it almost felt intentional. The cell door slid open. Work detail Jorick, Sector Gamma, scrubber maintenance. The guard's voice was flat, bored. Kalen placed the empty tray in the door slot and stepped out. The corridor was a long, white tube, its curvature barely perceptible. Inmates in gray jumpsuits moved with the slow, deliberate shuffles of men accustomed to artificial gravity. There was no running. A sudden loss of magnetic cohesion could send a man tumbling down the corridor, a clumsy pinball of flesh and bone. Heard about Fisk? The whisper came from his right. Kalen turned his head slightly. Corbin Vash scurried alongside him, his movements bird-like and anxious. Vash was a technician, a genius with code and circuitry, jailed for crashing a rival corporation's stock market AI. His paranoia was a constant, crackling energy field around him. Fisk from Delta Block, Vash insisted, his eyes wide. Gone, not transferred, not in solitary, just gone. His cellmate woke up and the bunk was empty. Door was locked from the outside. Kalen kept his gaze forward. Inmate disputes, a shiv in the dark. Body gets spaced out a cargo airlock. It happens. No, Vash hissed, his voice dropping lower. No blood, no sign of a struggle. The guards swept the cell and found nothing. It's the hum, I tell you. It's been different since last cycle. A subharmonic flutter. Something is wrong with the resonance coils. Everything is wrong here, Corbin, Kalen said, his tone clipped. He did not want to engage. Hope, even the paranoid kind, was a dangerous variable in this equation. They reached the junction to Sector Gamma. A hulking figure stood waiting by the airlock, his broad back to them, backs. The man was a mountain, convicted of crushing a foreman during a zero-G loading incident. He never spoke, not a word since he arrived. He moved with a strange, ponderous grace, a boulder that had learned to drift. He turned as they approached, his eyes flat and gray like the moon outside. He gave a short, sharp nod, the only acknowledgement he ever offered. The guard waved them through. Hamasaki wants those filters changed before next cycle. Don't mess it up. The airlock cycled, and the three of them stepped into the maintenance conduit. Here, the hum was louder, a raw mechanical roar. The corridor was a tight, cylindrical shaft filled with pipes and bundled cables. The magnetic walkway was a narrow strip down the center. To either side, the station's guts were exposed. Kalen got to work. His hands, long and precise, moved with practiced familiarity. He unfastened the filter casing, the metal cool against his fingertips. The work was rote, meditative. It was one of the few times his mind could go quiet, shielded from the crushing weight of his past and the bleak expanse of his future. Bax worked opposite him, his large hands surprisingly deft as he sealed the new filter into place. Corbin was already at a nearby access panel, his fingers flying across the interface. See, Corbin muttered more to himself than to them. The energy draw is erratic, spikes, microsecond spikes that don't correspond to any known system function. It's like a phantom limb. The station thinks something is here that isn't. Kalen ignored him. He focused on the satisfying click of the bolts locking into place. He was wiping his hands on a rag when a station-wide chime cut through the mechanical noise. It was the warden's signal. All non-essential chatter ceased. Warden Valerius's voice filled the station. It was a smooth, cultured baritone, the kind of voice that reassured stockholders and condemned men with the same placid confidence. A message to all residents. The recent unrest in Delta Block has been concluded. Inmate Fisk, following a violent altercation, has been moved to permanent punitive isolation. Let this serve as a reminder. Order will be maintained. This facility is a testament to humanity's ability to impose order on chaos. Do not test its resolve. The transmission ended. A lie, a clean, neat corporate lie to paper over a crack. Kalen glanced at Corbin. Vash was pale, his hands trembling slightly. Permanent punitive isolation, Corbin whispered, his voice shaking. There is no such wing. He's lying. Why is he lying? Bax stopped his work. He looked down the long service tunnel, his expression unreadable. He then turned his gaze to Kalen, holding it for a long moment. There was no fear in his eyes. There was something else, an awareness, a quiet, patient solemnity. Kalen turned away from them both. He looked at a small, grime-streaked viewport on the far side of the conduit. It offered a different angle of their silent partner in the sky. Lament. It hung there, cold and indifferent. As he watched, he saw a flicker, a trick of the light, a mote of dust on the thick plasteel. For a single, impossible instant, a section of the moon's surface seemed to shift. A patch of gray dust and craters momentarily resolved into a pattern of sharp, unnatural angles before snapping back to its familiar, dead topography. Kalen blinked. He rubbed his eyes. The moon was the same as it ever was, a dead rock, a tombstone. "Jorik, you done?" The guard's voice crackled over the local comm. "Done," Kalen replied, his own voice sounding distant. He pushed the thought away. It was fatigue, it was the hum, it was the endless gray of his life. It had to be. But as he turned to leave, he could not shake the image of those broken, geometric shapes. They felt older than the moon itself, and he was gripped by a sudden, chilling certainty that they were not a part of the rock. They were inside it, and they were waking up. The rest of the work detail passed in silence. When they returned to the main block, the atmosphere was different. The warden's announcement had not quelled the unease, it had given it a name. Inmates moved with a new tension, their conversations were hushed, their glances furtive. Fisk was gone. The warden had given an answer, but nobody believed it. A hole had appeared in their reality, and everyone was afraid of what might climb out. Back in his cell, the door slid shut, locking him in with the hum and the view of lament. He tried to read, to access the station's limited library on his data slate, but the words blurred. The image of the shifting lunar surface was burned into his mind. He walked to the viewport, placing his hands on the cool plasteel. He stared at the moon, searching for that flicker again, willing it to happen, willing it not to. Nothing, it was just a rock, a dead, silent rock. He was about to turn away when a new sound cut through the station's hum. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A high-frequency chime like crystal striking crystal. It was not part of the station's normal symphony. It was clean, pure, and utterly alien. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Kalen froze, straining to hear it again. The sound faded. He held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scanned the cell. Everything was normal. The bunk, the small sanitation unit, the metal desk. Then he saw it. On the floor, near the wall beneath the viewport, the shadows were wrong. The light from the corridor cast a faint glow into his cell, but one particular patch of shadow was too deep. It was a pool of absolute blackness that did not seem to follow the contours of the floor. As he watched, it elongated, stretching like spilled ink. It rose from the floor, a two-dimensional shape pulling itself into the third dimension. It was not a man. It was the absence of a man, a silhouette cut from the fabric of space. It had a head, a torso, 2 arms, 2 legs, but it had no features. It was a hole in the world. And inside that void, things shimmered. Kalen saw a brief, impossible glint of polished chrome, a shape like a scalpel, then a form like a long, delicate probe. They phased into view for a nanosecond, then vanished back into the emptiness of the form. Kalen did not scream. The sound was trapped in his throat, a solid ball of ice. He was paralyzed, his magnetic boots holding him fast to the floor. The figure, this observer, took a step. It made no sound. Its movement was fluid, a slow drift that defied the artificial gravity. It turned its featureless head towards him. Kalen felt a pressure in his mind, a cold, analytical curiosity that was not his own. It was not hatred or malice. It was the dispassionate focus of a scientist examining a microbe under a microscope. The chimes sounded again, louder this time, right inside his head. The observer took another silent step. Kalen's survival instincts finally broke through the paralysis. He lunged for the emergency call button next to the door, his hand slapping against the plastic cover. The moment his fingers made contact, the figure dissolved. It did not run or fade. It collapsed in on itself, the three-dimensional void shrinking back into a flat shadow on the floor, which then receded into nothingness. The cell was empty. The hum of the station was the only sound. Kalen was left hyperventilating, his back pressed against the door, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He had seen it. It was real. Fisk wasn't taken by another inmate. The station's hum wasn't just a mechanical flaw. The flicker on the moon wasn't a trick of the light. It was all connected, and it was coming from the silent, watchful moon. The old one was no longer sleeping. It was reaching out, and it had just learned his name. Chapter 2: The Silent Geometry. Solitary confinement was a box. A gray metal box 5 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 3 meters high. There was no viewport, no data slate, no contact. The only feature was a thin mattress on a metal slab and a sanitation unit. The hum of the station was muted here, a distant, almost forgotten pulse. For 2 days, Kalen had paced the length of the box, the magnetic soles of his boots the only percussion in a symphony of silence. Warden Valerius had called it a cooling-off period. After Kalen had frantically hammered the emergency call button, the guards had found him in a state they described as hysterical. He had babbled about shadows and things that were not there. They had put him on a sedative and thrown him in the box. Valerius's logic was simple. A man spouting nonsense was a threat to order. Suppress the man, and you suppress the chaos. But the silence did not bring clarity. It brought echoes. In the absence of external stimuli, Kalen's mind replayed the event on a loop. The silent, man-shaped hole. The impossible glint of surgical instruments. The feeling of being examined, catalogued, by a mind so vast and alien it was like being stared at by a galaxy. He stopped his packing and sat on the edge of the metal slab. He ran a hand over his face. He was a scientist. He dealt in evidence, in repeatable phenomena, in testable hypotheses. What he had witnessed defied every law of physics he had ever studied. It was a ghost story for the space age. And yet, the memory was so vivid, so undeniable, it had overwritten his understanding of the universe. He let his head fall into his hands. Was he losing his mind? Was this what happened when a man was stripped of everything? Does the brain, starved of meaning, simply invent monsters in the dark? He pushed himself off the slab and resumed his packing. No, Corbin Vash had seen the energy spikes. Fisk was gone. The warden was lying. These were data points. They were real. His experience was another data point, however impossible it seemed. He had to treat it as such. He began to analyze the memory, not as a traumatic event but as a scientific observation. The entity was non-physical, or at least capable of manipulating dimensions. It moved without sound or displacement of air. Its appearance was linked to a specific auditory phenomenon, the chime. It was drawn to him, or at least his cell. Why? He froze mid-stride. His cell, the viewport, the direct line of sight to lament. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, washed over him. The entity had not come from within the station. It had come from the moon. It was a projection, a remote drone for a consciousness that was still nestled deep within that sphere of cold rock. He walked to the wall of his cell, the one that would be facing the moon if he were in his own block. He pressed his palms against the cool metal. He closed his eyes, trying to feel something, anything, a vibration, a change in temperature. There was nothing, just the faint, deep thrum of the station. His fingers traced the surface of the wall, searching for any imperfection. He found one, a series of faint scratches near the floor. He knelt, his fingers exploring the grooves. They were not random. It was a pattern, deliberate and complex. A series of intersecting lines and impossible angles, a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional object that could not exist in normal space. It was the same broken geometry he had seen flicker on the moon's surface, the same kind of impossible shape he had glimpsed shimmering within the observer's form. Someone else had been in this cell, someone else had seen it, and they had tried to draw it. The door to the cell hissed open, flooding the space with the bright light of the corridor. Kalen squinted, shielding his eyes. Chief Guard Hamasaki stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Time's up, Jorik. The warden wants to see you." The walk to the warden's office was a disorienting journey. After 2 days in the gray box, the whites of the corridors were blinding, the chatter of inmates overwhelming. He felt raw, exposed. Guards flanked him, their presence a clear message. He was not being released, he was being escorted. The warden's office was at the very top of the station in the central command spire. It was the only room in the facility with a panoramic viewport, a sweeping vista of stars with lament hanging like a giant pearl in the center. The room was minimalist and immaculate. A single chrome desk, 2 chairs, no clutter. It was the sanctuary of a man obsessed with control. Warden Valerius sat behind the desk, his hands steepled. He was a handsome man in a severe way, his gray-streaked hair perfectly coiffed, his uniform immaculate. He radiated a dangerous calm. "Mr. Jorik," Valerius began, his voice smooth as polished stone, "please sit." Kalen remained standing. The guards took up positions by the door. Valerius's smile did not reach his eyes. "You have caused a considerable disruption. Your episode has fueled the very kind of baseless rumor I work so hard to suppress. This facility operates on a delicate psychological balance. Fear is a virus. I am the cure." "Inmate Fisk," Kalen said, his voice hoarse. "What happened to him?" "Was my station-wide address unclear?" Valerius replied, his tone hardening slightly. "He was a violent offender who has been permanently removed from the general population. That is the final word on the matter." "You're lying," Kalen stated. "It was not an accusation, it was a fact. Something else is happening on this station, something you are trying to cover up." Valerius leaned back in his chair, studying Kalen with cold amusement. "Let me tell you what is happening, Mr. Jorik. A disgraced scientist, a man whose career ended because he could not distinguish between data and fantasy, is suffering a psychotic break under the strain of incarceration. It's a classic case study. The mind, unable to accept its mundane failure, invents a vast, cosmic conspiracy to give itself a sense of importance. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. I have read your file, all of it. Your absurd theories about the moon. You see monsters because you want to see monsters. It validates the ruin of your life. I saw it, Kalen insisted, his hands clenching into fists. In my cell, a figure made of shadow. A hallucination, Valerius countered smoothly, brought on by stress and isolation. Dr. Madsen has already prepared a report. You will be scheduled for mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment. And the energy spikes, Kalen shot back, and the scratchings on the wall of the solitary cell, the same geometric patterns from my old research. Are those hallucinations too? For the first time, a flicker of something other than contempt crossed the warden's face, a sliver of surprise. He recovered almost instantly. Paranoid delusions, Mr. Jorick. You are seeing patterns where there are none. That is the definition of psychosis. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of the massive viewport. Lament loomed behind him, a halo for a devil. This is my station, Valerius said, his voice soft but laced with steel. Every person, every system, every molecule of air is under my command. I am offering you a simple choice. You will accept Dr. Madsen's diagnosis. You will take the prescribed medication. You will return to your duties and you will never speak of this again. You will be a model prisoner in a model facility. And if I don't? Kalen asked. Valerius turned, a faint, cruel smile on his lips. Then you will become a danger to yourself and others. A man so lost in his own fantasies that he requires permanent, intensive care. There are places in this station for men like that. Small, quiet places where they can't disturb the order of things. Places where no one will hear them scream. The threat was unambiguous. Kalen would disappear just like Fisk. He would be another problem solved, another loose end tied off. I understand, Kalen said, the words tasting like ash. Good, Valerius said, turning back to the viewport. Chief Hamasaki, escort Mr. Jorick to the medical bay, then return him to his work detail. The journey to the med bay was short. Dr. Lena Madsen was a tired-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes. She did not meet Kalen's gaze as she administered an injection. She handed him a small packet of pills. 1 every 12 hours, she mumbled, her voice devoid of emotion. It will help you stabilize. She knew. Kalen could see it in the slight tremble of her hands, in the way she refused to look at him. She was another cog in the warden's machine of denial. He was escorted back to his cell block. The guards shoved him inside and the door hissed shut. He was alone again with the hum, the pills, and the moon. He looked at the packet in his hand. Stabilize, a euphemism for stupefy. He walked to the sanitation unit, opened the packet, and dropped the pills into the recycler. He would need his mind sharp. An hour later, his cell door opened again. A guard stood there. Work detail, Sector Epsilon, decontamination cycle. It was not his scheduled detail. It was a message from the warden. He was being watched. He was being tested. Sector Epsilon was one of the oldest parts of the station, a section of tight corridors and humming machinery slated for an upgrade. It was isolated, far from the main population blocks. As he entered the main access tunnel, he saw who his work partners were. Bax stood by a massive pump housing, his silent presence as solid and unmoving as ever. And lurking near a conduit junction was Corbin Vash, who looked even more agitated than usual. "They sent you here too," Vash whispered as Kalen approached. "It's a punishment detail. They put us all on the fringe, the ones who ask questions." Kalen walked over to a control panel and began the diagnostic sequence. His hands moved automatically, but his mind was racing. The warden had put the three of them together: the paranoid technician, the silent giant, and the mad scientist. He was isolating the infection. "The spikes are getting worse," Corbin said, sidling closer. "And the frequency is changing. The hum. It's developing a pattern. It's not random noise anymore. It's a signal." "Corbin," Kalen said, keeping his voice low, "I need access to the deep archives, the original geological surveys of Lament, and I need to get into the unused service tunnels behind Delta Block." Vash's eyes widened in terror. "Delta Block? No, no way, that's where Fisk. That's a dead zone. The energy readings there are off the charts." "It's where the answers are," Kalen pressed. "Can you do it?" Vash chewed on his lip, his eyes darting around the corridor. "The archives. Maybe I can try to slice a backdoor, but the service tunnels, the access hatches are all biolocked." As if on cue, a loud clang echoed from further down the corridor. All three of them turned. A heavy metal plate, part of the pump housing Bax had been inspecting, had come loose and fallen to the floor. A guard's voice crackled over the comm. "What was that? Report." Before Kalen could answer, Bax took two long, gliding steps towards the pump. He grabbed the heavy plate with one hand. With his other, he gripped the edge of the housing. With a single, explosive effort of controlled strength, he bent the thick metal frame of the housing, forcing the plate back into a position where it could be rebolted. It was a feat that should have required a hydraulic press. Kalen stared, stunned by the display of raw power. "It was just a loose plate," Kalen said into his comm link, "securing it now." He looked at Bax, who simply nodded, his expression unchanged. Then Kalen looked at Corbin. The technician was staring at Bax with a new respect. Kalen spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "He can get us through the hatches." The plan was insane. It was a suicide mission, but it was better than waiting in a cell for the shadows to come for him again. Suddenly, the lights in the corridor flickered. They did not go out, but they dimmed to a deep red emergency glow. The constant hum of the station died, replaced by an unnerving silence. A single, pure chime, the same one from Kalen's cell, echoed through the metal corridor. "It's here," Corbin whimpered, shrinking back against a wall. Kalen's blood ran cold. He scanned the corridor. It was empty, but the feeling was there, the pressure in his mind, the cold, dispassionate curiosity. "Where is it?" he hissed. Bax did not look around. He looked up. Kalen followed his gaze. High above them, on the curved ceiling of the tunnel, a section of metal began to ripple like a reflection in disturbed water. The ripple coalesced, darkened, and then tore open. It was not a hole in the ceiling. It was a hole in space itself, a wound in reality. From this wound the observer descended. It did not fall, it flowed, pouring into their dimension like black smoke. It solidified into its familiar, man-shaped void, the impossible glint of surgical tools shimmering in its depths. It hung in the air, its feet not touching the floor, its featureless head slowly surveying the three of them. And then it drifted, not towards Kalen, not towards Bax. It moved towards Corbin Vash. The technician screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of pure terror. He scrambled backwards, but there was nowhere to go. The observer reached him. It did not grab him. It simply passed through him. For a moment, Corbin stood frozen, his eyes wide with a horror beyond comprehension. Then his body began to deconstruct. It was not violent or bloody. It was a process of disassembly. A section of his arm dissolved into a cloud of fine dust. His leg twisted at an impossible angle, then folded in on itself and vanished. His scream was cut short as his jaw detached and floated away, disintegrating into nothing. It was a dissection, a zero-gravity, biological deconstruction performed by a being that viewed the laws of physics as mere suggestions. Kalen stood frozen in horror, unable to move, unable to breathe, but Bax moved. The silent giant did not attack. He launched himself from the floor, his movement a powerful, graceful arc in the low light. He did not aim for the observer. He flew in front of Kalen, placing his own massive body between the scientist and the entity. He spread his arms wide, creating a human shield. It was a gesture of pure, instinctual defiance. The observer paused its work, its featureless head turning from the dissolving remains of Corbin Vash to the man who dared to interfere. It regarded Bax, a solid, defiant piece of matter standing in its way. The pressure in Kalen's mind intensified. The cold curiosity was being replaced by something else, a flicker of annoyance. The dissection of Corbin Vash stopped. The few remaining parts of him simply ceased to exist. The observer, a perfect void in the dim red light, now focused its entire, ancient attention on the two men who remained. The experiment had been interrupted, and the scientist did not approve. Chapter 3: The Warden's Wall. The silence that followed Corbin's disintegration was more terrifying than his scream. It was a profound, absolute stillness, broken only by the faint, pulsing red of the emergency lights. Kalen's breath hitched in his throat, a ragged, painful sound. Behind the shield of Bax's broad back he watched the observer. The man-shaped hole in reality hovered motionless. The surgical tools shimmering within its form, the scalpels, the forceps, the things with no name, seemed to glint with a sharper, more focused light. The pressure in Kalen's mind shifted. It was no longer a detached examination. It was an intent, a sharp, pointed focus that felt like a spike being driven into his skull. The entity had been observing. Now it was preparing to act. Bax remained motionless, a human wall between Kalen and the impossible. His posture was not aggressive. It was resolute. He was a boulder in the path of a tidal wave, a gesture of defiance so primal it seemed to momentarily confuse the ancient intelligence before them. The moment stretched, taut and brittle. Then the main power surged back on. The emergency reds were blasted away by the harsh, sterile white of the corridor's primary lighting. The station's deep hum returned with a jolt, a familiar roar that was suddenly the most reassuring sound in the universe. And the observer was gone. It did not fade or flee. It simply ceased to be there. The space it had occupied was once again just empty air. There was no trace of its presence. There was no trace of Corbin Vash. Not a drop of blood. Not a shred of his gray jumpsuit. He had been erased from existence as cleanly as a line of code. Kalen sagged against the wall, his legs threatening to give out. Bax slowly lowered himself to the floor, his magnetic boots clunking down with heavy finality. He turned to Kalen, his face a mask of grim resolve. For the first time, Kalen saw something in the silent man's eyes beyond simple awareness. He saw a shared trauma, a shared enemy. The local comm crackled to life. Report Epsilon. We registered a massive energy surge and a life sign failure. What is your status? Kalen's mind raced. What could he say? The truth was unbelievable. A lie was temporary. He looked at the empty space where Corbin had been. The warden's machine of denial would swallow this event whole. Corbin Vash would become another inmate dispute, another containment breach. There was an electrical overload, Kalen said, his voice a strained whisper. A power surge from the pump housing. Vash was too close. He was incinerated. It was a weak lie, a flimsy story. But it was something physical, something the guards could write in a report. Stay where you are, the comm commanded. A response team is on its way. Bax walked over to the pump housing. He placed a hand on the spot where Corbin had stood. Then he looked at Kalen and shook his head slowly. He pointed a single, thick finger at the ceiling at the spot where the observer had emerged. He was not fooled by the lie. He knew the truth. The response team arrived in minutes. They were guards in heavy-duty gear, their faces grim. They swept the area, their scanners finding nothing but residual energy signatures consistent with Kalen's story. They found no body. They found no evidence of a third party. Kalen and Bax were escorted to the medical bay. Again, Dr. Madsen met them, her face even more pale and drawn than before. She ran a scanner over them, her movements jerky and inefficient. "They're in shock," she reported to the lead guard. "No physical injuries." "The warden wants to see Jorik." "Alone," the guard grunted. The second walk to Valerius's office was a death march. Kalen knew what was coming. He had witnessed the impossible twice. He had been with two men when they vanished. He was no longer just a nuisance. He was a nexus of chaos. The office was the same. The cold chrome, the perfect order, the ever-present watchful eye of lament hanging in the viewport. Valerius was not behind his desk. He stood before the window, his back to the door. "Incinerated," Valerius said, his voice dangerously soft. "That is your report. A convenient, if unimaginative, explanation for the disappearance of another inmate in your presence." He turned around. His face was not angry. It was cold, hard, and utterly devoid of any emotion save for a deep, chilling contempt. "You are a plague, Mr. Jorek," Valerius continued, his voice low. "You and your fantasies, you infect others with your madness. Vash was a paranoid, but he was a useful technician. Now he is gone because of you." "That's not what happened," Kalen said, his voice steady. "We both know it. You can feel it in the station, can't you? The power fluctuations, the system ghosts. You have access to all the data. You see the same things Corbin saw, you just refuse to accept it." Valerius walked slowly towards him, his eyes boring into Kalen's. "What I accept is that I am in command of a 3 billion credit facility filled with the worst dregs of humanity. My duty is to maintain stability. Your stories, your monsters, are a direct threat to that stability, an infection that must be purged." "By covering it up," Kalen challenged. "By pretending people are not being taken. What is your plan, Warden? What happens when it takes a guard? What happens when it takes you?" Valerius stopped, inches from Kalen. "That will not happen because I am going to solve the problem. You are the problem, Jorek. You are the focal point. Whatever this mass hysteria is, it revolves around you." He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "So this is what will happen. You will be transferred to the infirmary, permanently. You will be kept under heavy sedation. You will be a cautionary tale. The brilliant scientist who flew too close to the sun and lost his mind. Your story will serve my purpose. It will restore order." He stepped back, a look of finality on his face. "Your world ends today, Mr. Jorek. You will have a nice, small, padded box. You can see all the monsters you want in there." Two guards entered the office. They flanked Kalen, their hands resting on their stun batons. This was it, the end of the line. He would be drugged into a stupor, locked away until his mind rotted. But as the guards took his arms, Kalen remembered something. A piece of leverage, a desperate long shot. "The log files," Kalen said, his voice clear and sharp. Valerius, who had turned his back, paused. "Chief Hamasaki," Kalen continued, his eyes locked on the warden's back. "He's loyal to you, but he's a good guard. He keeps his own logs, secret logs. I saw him on his data slate after the first incident with Fisk. He's investigating this on his own. He knows something is wrong." Valerius turned slowly, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You are bluffing." "Am I?" Kalen pressed, his confidence growing. "He was a good soldier in your war for order, but he's starting to question his commander. What happens when he finds out what you did to me? What happens when he compares his logs to your falsified reports? An internal investigation, a corporate review, your perfect record, your entire career, undone by one honest guard." It was a gamble based on a single glance, a gut feeling. But he saw it land. The warden's cold certainty was cracked. The risk of a subordinate exposing the cover-up, however small, was a variable he had not fully accounted for. Valerius stared at Kalen for a long, silent moment. The guards waited, their hands still on Kalen's arms. The warden was recalculating. He was weighing the risk of letting Kalen go against the risk of creating a martyr that an honest guard might rally behind. "You have one cycle," Valerius said finally, his voice clipped. 24 hours, you will bring me proof, not stories, not paranoid theories. Hard, irrefutable evidence of what you claim is happening. If you succeed, we will reevaluate the situation. If you fail, or if one more inmate disappears, or if I hear one more whisper of monsters in the corridors, I will personally escort you to that padded room and throw away the key. And I will deal with Chief Hamasaki. He nodded to the guards. Release him. The guards let go of Kalen's arms. Your work detail is cancelled, Valerius said, turning back to the viewport. Confine yourself to the common areas. I want you where I can see you. Your 24 hours have begun. Kalen walked out of the office, his heart pounding. He had bought himself time, a tiny, precious window. He knew where he had to go. The place Corbin had been too terrified to mention. The service tunnels behind Delta Block, the epicenter of the energy readings, the place where Fisk had vanished. He found Bax in the mess hall. The silent giant was sitting alone, his tray of nutrient paste untouched. He looked up as Kalen approached, his eyes asking the question. I have a day, Kalen said, sitting opposite him. I need to get into the service tunnels behind Delta. It's the only place to find proof. Bax stared at him, his expression unreadable. Kalen leaned forward, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Corbin is gone. Fisk is gone. We are next. That thing. It's studying us, taking us apart piece by piece. Our only chance is to understand it, to find a weakness. That means going to the source. He took a napkin and a stylus from his pocket. He drew the complex, non-Euclidean shape he had found on the solitary cell wall, the geometry of the entity. This is its language, Kalen said, pushing the napkin across the table. This is its signature. I think the answers are in those tunnels. Bax looked at the drawing. He traced the impossible lines with his thick finger. He then looked up, past Kalen, towards the corridor that led to Delta Block. He gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. The alliance was sealed. Finding proof would not be easy. The warden would have eyes on him. The hatches were locked, and the entity was out there hunting. But Kalen now had a mission, a partner, and a deadline. He looked from the drawing on the napkin to the silent, determined face of the man opposite him. For the first time since arriving at the Penumbra Facility, he was not just a prisoner. He was a combatant in a war he was only beginning to understand. And the first battle was about to begin in the dark, forgotten corridors behind Delta Block. Chapter 4: The Echo in the Wires. The 24-hour clock was a tangible weight, a pressure on Kalen's chest that made each breath a conscious effort. Every tick of the station's chronometer was a step closer to a padded cell and chemical oblivion. Order. The warden's obsession with the word echoed in his mind. But the warden's order was a fragile skin stretched over a roiling chaos, and Kalen intended to pierce it. The first challenge was information. Corbin was gone, and with him, their only way to slice into the station's secure systems. Kalen sat with Bax in a recessed alcove of the mess hall, away from the main thoroughfare and the prying eyes of the guards. The napkin with the impossible geometry lay between them. I need a terminal, Kalen murmured, more to himself than to Bax. Unrestricted, not these public access slates. I need to get into the maintenance schematics, the energy grid logs. Corbin said the archives. He mentioned a back door. Bax's gaze drifted across the mess hall. He watched the inmates, the guards, the flow of traffic. His eyes, usually flat and passive, were now active, analytical. He was searching. After a long moment, his gaze settled on a figure huddled in a far corner. Kalen followed his line of sight. He saw a small, young woman with a shock of brightly dyed hair that violated at least 3 minor regulations. She was hunched over a data slate, her fingers a blur across the screen. Kalen recognized her. Pippa, the inmates called her. Pip Squeak, a low-level hacker in for data theft. She was known for being perpetually terrified, a mouse hiding from the prison's many cats. Bax gave a subtle nod in her direction. Her, Kalen whispered, skeptical. She's a child. She looks like she'd break if you looked at her too hard. Bax met Kalen's gaze and tapped a thick finger on the table, a gesture of quiet insistence. He saw something Kalen did not, a skill hidden beneath the fear. Trusting the silent man's intuition, Kalen stood up. "Stay here, be visible," Kalen instructed. He crossed the room, his magnetic boots making soft, deliberate clunks on the deck plating. The girl, Pippa, did not look up as he approached. Her entire world was the data slate in her hands. "Pippa," Kalen said softly. She flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes were wide and frightened like a startled fawn. She clutched the data slate to her chest. "I haven't done anything." "I know," Kalen said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not a guard. My name is Kalen. I need your help." "Help," she stammered, already shaking her head. "No, I don't get involved. Getting involved is how you get noticed. I don't want to be noticed." "Corbin Vash is dead," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The girl's face went pale. She had known him. In the small, desperate world of the prison's tech-savvy inmates, they had all known each other. "They said it was an accident," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. "It wasn't," Kalen said. "And the same thing that got him is going to get more of us unless I can find a way to stop it." Corbin mentioned a backdoor he built into the station archives, a way to access unrestricted data. "I think he would have trusted you with its location." Pippa hugged her data slate tighter. "That's crazy talk. I don't know anything about any backdoors." Kalen leaned closer. "The warden has given me 23 hours to bring him proof that something is wrong on this station. If I fail, I get locked away permanently. They'll say I went insane. The disappearances will continue and the warden will keep lying. Corbin's death will mean nothing." He paused, letting the words sink in. He saw a flicker of something in her frightened eyes. Anger, indignation, a sense of injustice that was stronger than her fear. "Even if I knew," she said, her voice barely audible, "what could I do? The public terminals are firewalled. We can't access anything sensitive from here." "I don't need you to do it from here," Kalen said. "I just need the location, the access point. Is there a terminal on this station that isn't as locked down as the rest?" Pippa bit her lip, her mind clearly working. The fear was still there, but the problem, the technical challenge, was engaging her. "The old comm station," she finally whispered. "In Sector Zeta, it's mostly decommissioned. They use it for storage. but the primary hardline to the central server is still active. It's a physical connection, so it bypasses most of the network security protocols. Corbin used to say it was the one place on the station you could whisper without the warden hearing you. "How do I get in?" Kalen asked. "You don't," she said. "It's kept locked. Bioscanner. Only senior guards and maintenance supervisors have access." Kalen glanced back at Bax, who was watching them patiently. "Leave that to me," he said. He looked back at Pippa. "And the back door." She hesitated for a long moment, then her fingers flew across her own data slate. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "It's not a location. It's a command line, a ghost executable. Corbin called it Echo. You have to input it manually at the root directory. It won't show up on any scan. It creates a temporary mirror of the archives, but it's unstable. The mirror only lasts for a few minutes before it collapses, and it leaves a massive energy signature. The warden will know someone was digging." "A few minutes is all I need," Kalen said. "What's the command?" She typed for another few seconds, then showed him the screen. It was a complex string of alphanumeric code, interspersed with symbols Kalen didn't recognize. It was elegant, brilliant, and utterly unintelligible to an outsider. "Memorize it," she whispered. "Don't write it down." Kalen stared at the screen, burning the sequence into his memory. He was a scientist, used to memorizing complex formulae. He recited it back to her under his breath. She nodded, her face grim, and wiped the screen. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "The mistake was building a prison in the shadow of that moon," Kalen replied. "Thank you, Pippa." He walked back to Bax and sat down. "Sector Zeta, an old comms station, biolocked." Bax simply nodded. Getting through a locked door was a trivial problem for a man who could bend steel frames. The greater challenge was getting to Sector Zeta without a guard escort. The opportunity came an hour later. A work detail was announced. Waste reclamation, Sector Zeta. It was a dirty, undesirable job and few inmates volunteered. "We need a distraction," Kalen murmured. Bax looked across the mess hall. He saw a group of inmates from a notoriously violent gang, the Iron Heads, harassing a smaller inmate over a portion of food. An argument was escalating. A guard was moving in to break it up. Bax stood up. He walked calmly and deliberately towards the commotion. He did not run. He did not shout. He simply inserted his massive frame between the aggressors and their victim. He did not throw a punch. He just stood there, an immovable object. The gang leader, a wiry man with a scarred face, turned on Bax. "This ain't your business, you dumb ox." Bax did not respond. He just stared, his expression flat. The gang leader, emboldened by his crew, shoved Bax in the chest. It was like shoving a concrete wall. Bax did not even rock on his feet. The guard, now joined by two others, moved in, batons drawn. The confrontation escalated into a full-blown mess hall brawl. It was the perfect distraction. While the guards were preoccupied, Kalen slipped out of the mess hall. He moved quickly, keeping to the less trafficked corridors. He met up with Bax 10 minutes later at the junction to Sector Zeta. The silent giant had a new cut on his cheek, but he was otherwise unscathed. He had done his part. Now it was time for Kalen to do his. Sector Zeta was eerily quiet. The lights were dimmer here, the hum of the station more subdued. It was a graveyard of old technology. Dust motes danced in the faint light. They found the comms station at the end of a long, branching corridor. It was a heavy-duty door with a glowing blue bioscanner next to it. Locked. Secure. Bax stepped up to the door. He examined the frame, the locking mechanism, the hinges. He was not looking at it as a door but as a physics problem. He placed his hands on the frame, his fingers finding purchase. He braced his feet. Kalen watched, his heart pounding. Quietly, he whispered. Bax took a deep breath. His muscles bunched. The metal of the door frame began to groan, a low, tortured sound. It was not the explosive sound of breaking metal, but the slow, agonizing protest of steel being bent against its will. A seam appeared between the door and the frame. It widened. With a final, silent heave, Bax pulled the entire locking mechanism clear of the wall. The door swung open with a soft sigh. They slipped inside. The room was filled with banks of obsolete computer terminals, their screens dark. A thick layer of dust covered everything. In the center of the room, however, was a single, newer-looking console, the primary hardline access point. It was active, its power light a steady green eye in the gloom. "Stand guard," Kalen said, his voice hushed. He sat down at the console. The screen flickered to life, displaying a simple text-based operating system. This was the station's skeleton. He navigated to the root directory. His fingers, trembling slightly, typed in the command line Pippa had given him. He hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flooded with text. Data streams, file directories, security protocols, all scrolling past at an impossible speed. A window opened in the center of the screen. Echo mirror active. T-minus 300 seconds. 5 minutes. Kalen's fingers flew across the keyboard. He ignored the personnel files, the supply manifests. He went straight for the deep archives. Geological survey, lament, pre-construction. Files appeared, encrypted, sealed files, but the echo command had bypassed the security. He opened the first one. It was a seismic activity report. He scrolled through pages of dry data. Then he found it, an addendum written by the lead surveyor. Addendum 1A encountered anomalous resonance readings emanating from the moon's core. Frequencies do not match any known geological model. The patterns are complex, non-repeating, almost mathematical. Recommend further study. He opened another file, a report on gravitational fluctuations. Addendum 2C. Mass concentration mapping shows a significant gravimetric anomaly. The moon's core is orders of magnitude denser than predicted. Furthermore, the anomaly appears to be shifting, moving within the moon's mantle. This is physically impossible. My team suspects equipment malfunction, but all diagnostics are green. I am recommending a full system recalibration and a second survey. He was right. His original research had not been fantasy. It had been corroborated by the corporation's own surveyors. They had seen the same things he had, and they had buried it. He kept digging. He found a third file, a series of fragmented log entries from the chief surveyor. They were tagged for deletion. Log entry 7. The resonance patterns are becoming more complex. One of my techs, Velt, claims they sound like a language. He's been running them through a decryption algorithm. I told him he's losing it. Log entry 9. Velt is gone, vanished from his quarters. The company is calling it an off-duty accident. No one believes it. The crew is on edge. The resonance has stopped. Log entry 12. We're pulling out. The official reason is unforeseen geological instability. The company has placed a gag order on the entire crew. They know something is down there. They know, and they are leaving it here. Kaelin's blood ran cold. This was it, the proof. The corporation knew. They had known from the beginning. They had built a prison on top of a dormant, predatory intelligence. They had not just ignored the danger. They had used it. This facility wasn't just a prison. It was a cage and a feeding trough. T-minus 60 seconds. The screen flashed. Kaelin frantically searched for a way to download the files. But the echo was a mirror, not a bridge. There was no way to transfer the data out. He had to find something else, something he could take with him. He jumped to the station's energy grid logs. He searched for the dates of Fisk's disappearance and then Corbin's. Both times he found the same signature, a massive, localized energy spike sourced from an external, non-station frequency. It was the electronic fingerprint of the observer. He cross-referenced the frequency. It was a perfect match for the anomalous resonance from the original geological survey. T-minus 10 seconds. He needed something more, something visual. He typed in a new search. Internal sensor LOGS, Delta Block, Cell 4B Fisk Cell. The screen flickered. Access DENIED, File CORRUPTED. He tried again. Maintenance Drone LOGS, Sector Epsilon, the place where Corbin died. Access DENIED, file erased by user, VALERIUS. The warden had been cleaning house. He was erasing the evidence. But erasing a file leaves a trace, a digital scar. T-0, Echo Mirror COLLAPSING. The screen went black. A moment later, the standard lockdown operating system returned. It was over. Kaelin sat back, his mind reeling. He had the truth. The corporation knew. The warden was actively covering it up, but he had no physical proof. The files were gone, the mirror collapsed. He had nothing to show the warden but his own word. "Did you get it?" Bax's voice, a low rumble, came from the doorway. It was the first time Kaelin had heard him speak. The sound was so unexpected, so deep and resonant, it startled him. "I got the truth," Kaelin said, turning to face him. "But I don't have the proof." Valerius erased the sensor logs. Bax stepped into the room. "Erasing is not destroying," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "The data is still there, on the physical drive, in the memory of the machine." He pointed to a large server bank in the corner of the room. The maintenance drone, Unit 734, its memory core is isolated. It doesn't sync with the main server until its monthly diagnostic. The warden may have erased the file from the network, but the drone's own memory, it's still there. Kaelin stared at the silent giant. He was not just muscle. There was a sharp, practical intelligence behind those flat eyes. The drone, Kalen breathed. It cleaned up the site in Epsilon. It would have recorded everything. Where is it now? Bax walked to the console. His massive fingers, surprisingly precise, typed a few commands into the public maintenance schedule. A simple schematic appeared on the screen, a map of the station's automated drone routes. Unit 734, Bax said, his finger tapping the screen. Scheduled for diagnostic tomorrow at the Central Maintenance Hub in Delta Block. Delta Block, the heart of the problem, the place where it all began. They had to go there. They had to get to that drone and extract its memory core before the warden's monthly diagnostic wiped it clean. They had a target, they had a location, and their clock was still ticking. The truth was trapped inside a machine in the most dangerous section of the prison, and they had less than 20 hours to get it out. Chapter 5: The Geometry of Fear. Delta Block was a wound. Even from the main corridor, separated by a heavy pressure door, Kalen could feel the wrongness of the place. The air seemed colder, the station's hum dissonant and strained like an engine on the verge of seizing. The other inmates avoided it. They would walk the long way around through other sectors rather than pass this junction. They called it the dead sector, a place of bad luck and bad memories. Kalen and Bax stood before the pressure door. A single, blinking red light above it indicated the block was on lockdown. Valerius had sealed it off after Fisk's disappearance. It was his way of sweeping the problem under the rug. But now it was a vault, and they needed to crack it. "The main door is a no-go," Kalen said, his voice low. "The controls are in the central security hub. The warden will know the second we try to override it." Bax nodded. He turned and pointed down the corridor they had come from, then pointed to a maintenance hatch set into the floor. "The service tunnels," he rumbled. "They run beneath the block. They have to." It was their only option. The crawl spaces, the station's dark, dusty veins. They found a utility closet that was not under direct camera surveillance. The hatch was heavy, secured by 4 pressure bolts. Kalen worked on the electronic lock, his fingers tracing the circuits he now knew by heart. A few crossed wires, a redirected power surge, and the lock clicked open. Bax lifted the heavy metal plate as if it were cardboard. A wave of cool, stale air washed over them. The space below was dark, a black pit filled with the shapes of pipes and conduits. Kalen switched on a small hand light he had palmed from the utility closet. The beam cut a small, nervous circle in the darkness. "I'll go first," Kalen said. He lowered himself into the tunnel. His boots clanged on a narrow metal walkway. The space was tight, claustrophobic. A lattice of pipes and cables surrounded him, coated in a thick layer of gray dust. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and old, recycled air. Bax followed, his large frame filling the tunnel, moving with a surprising silence. They moved slowly, Kalen leading with the light, Bax watching their rear. The only sounds were the soft scuff of their boots on the walkway and the distant, distorted hum of the station above. Here, beneath the floors, the sound was different. It was a groaning, protesting sound, the sound of a structure under immense, unseen stress. After 20 minutes of slow progress, Kalen saw something on the wall of the tunnel. He stopped, holding the light steady. Scratches, deep gouges in the metal wall. They were not random. They formed a familiar, terrifying pattern. The silent, non-Euclidean geometry of the observer. "It's been here," Kalen whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Bax came up behind him. He reached out and touched the scratches. "Cold," he grunted. The metal around the marks was noticeably colder than the rest of the tunnel wall, as if the entity's passage had leached the heat from it. As they stood there, a new sound reached them. It was faint but clear in the relative silence of the tunnel. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from further down the tunnel, from the direction of Delta Block. They exchanged a look. Someone else was down here. They extinguished the light. The darkness was absolute. Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs. They waited, listening. The tapping continued, slow and steady. It was not the sound of work. It was something else. They moved forward, their hands outstretched, feeling their way along the cold pipes. The tapping grew louder. They rounded a bend in the tunnel and saw a faint light ahead. It was a dim, flickering glow coming from a maintenance junction where several tunnels converged. Kalen peered around the edge of a large conduit pipe. In the center of the junction, an old, battery-powered lantern cast a pool of weak light, and in that light was a man. He was an older inmate, his gray jumpsuit ragged, his face gaunt and pale. He was sitting on the floor, his back to them. In his hand was a small, heavy piece of metal, and he was using it to tap rhythmically against a large, circular access hatch on the floor. The hatch that Kalen knew must lead up into the heart of Delta Block. It was the archivist, the old man tasked with digitizing the prison's records. Kalen had seen him in the mess hall, a quiet, forgotten figure. What was he doing here? As they watched, the archivist stopped his tapping. He cocked his head as if listening to something they could not hear. Then he spoke to the hatch. "I hear you," the old man whispered, his voice raspy. "I know you're there, the numbers, the patterns, it's all in the records, the resonance. It's a song, and you are the singer." He laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "The warden thinks he can hide you, but you don't want to be hidden, do you? You want to be heard." He was communicating with something, or he was insane. Given their recent experiences, Kalen suspected it was the former. Kalen stepped out from behind the pipe. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice sharp. The archivist scrambled around, his eyes wide with fear and a strange, ecstatic light. "You," he hissed. "The scientist, the one who looked at the moon. He doesn't like it when you look." "Who?" Kalen pressed, taking a step closer. Bax emerged from the darkness behind him, a silent, menacing shadow. "The one who sings the song of the stars," the archivist cried, scrambling to his feet. "The one who builds with broken lines. I found his voice in the old words, in the surveys, in the accident reports. He speaks in numbers, in patterns, in death." He was pointing at the hatch. "This is his choir hall. This is where the song is loudest." He had found the same breadcrumbs Kalen had, but his mind had interpreted them not as a conspiracy, but as a religion. He was a worshiper. "The drone," Kalen said, his voice urgent. Unit 734, we need to get to it. The cleaning angel, the archivist whispered with reverence. It polishes the altar. It sees the holy work, but its memories are not for you. They are offerings for him. He lunged, not at Kalen or Bax, but at a large lever on the wall, a manual purge valve for the fire suppression system. He is coming, the archivist shrieked, pulling down on the lever. Bax moved with incredible speed. He crossed the junction in 2 long strides, his hand closing over the archivist's. But it was too late. The lever was down. A deafening klaxon began to blare throughout the service tunnels. Red lights flashed, strobing their faces in a macabre display. Security breach. Fire suppression activated in service tunnel Zeta 9. A robotic voice announced from speakers above. They had been discovered. The archivist cackled madly as Bax easily subdued him, holding him in a grip of iron. He is coming. You have called him. And then the klaxon stopped. The flashing lights went dead. The entire tunnel was plunged into silence and darkness. The power had been cut. No, Kalen breathed. This was how it happened, the silence, the darkness, the chime. A faint, high-frequency sound began to emanate from the hatch on the floor, a pure, crystalline tone that grew steadily in volume. The archivist stopped struggling. A look of blissful horror spread across his face. "He's here," he whispered, "the conductor." The circular hatch on the floor began to glow with a faint, purple light. The metal creaked and groaned, not from pressure, but as if the laws of physics that held it together were being rewritten. The geometric patterns, the signature of the observer, appeared on its surface, glowing lines of cold, dark energy. Kalen grabbed the lantern from the floor and shone it on the hatch. The light seemed to bend around it, absorbed by the growing darkness. The hatch was no longer a door. It was a lens, a focal point for the entity's power. "We have to go," Kalen yelled, pulling on Bax's arm. "Now." Bax did not need convincing. He shoved the now placid archivist aside and turned to run. But the entity was not focused on them. Its attention was on the old man who had summoned it. The archivist knelt before the glowing hatch, his arms outstretched. "Take me," he pleaded. "Let me be a part of the song." A tendril of blackness, a single, questing filament of the void, emerged from the center of the hatch. It snaked through the air and touched the archivist on the forehead. The old man's eyes rolled back in his head. He did not scream. He did not deconstruct like Corbin. Instead, a light began to shine from within him. His skin became translucent, showing the bones and organs beneath. And then his form began to shift. His limbs elongated. His spine curved. His body contorted, breaking and reforming into a series of sharp, impossible angles. He was being transformed into a living effigy of the entity's own geometry. A living, breathing piece of impossible art. Kalen and Bax stared, frozen in horrified fascination. The archivist's transformation was a grotesque, silent ballet of biological reconfiguration. He was becoming a message, a warning. The sound of heavy, magnetic boots clanking down the main tunnel broke the spell. The guards, they were coming. Kalen grabbed Bax's arm again, this time with more force. "Bax, we have to go, now." They ran. They plunged back into the absolute darkness of the service tunnels, away from the glowing hatch and the thing it was creating. Behind them, they heard the shouts of the guards as they reached the junction, followed by screams of terror and the crackle of energy weapons being fired at something that could not be shot. They had failed. They had no proof. They had triggered a security alert, and they had just led the warden's guards into a slaughterhouse. Their 24-hour deadline had just become a race for their own survival. The warden's wall of denial was about to be shattered, but not by Kalen's proof. It was about to be torn down by the monster he had sworn to protect his station from. Chapter 6. The Warden's Empty Chair. The flight through the service tunnels was a blind, frantic scramble. Kalen led, his memory of the path a fragile map in the suffocating darkness. Behind him, he could hear the heavy, reassuring presence of Bax. And further back, the sounds of the unfolding horror echoed through the metal tubes. The shouts of the guards had turned to panicked screams, punctuated by the high-pitched whine of their energy rifles discharging. Then, a new sound was added to the cacophony. A deep, resonant chime, like a cathedral bell rung underwater, that vibrated through the very structure of the station. The entity was fully manifest. They burst out of a floor hatch into a deserted storage bay in Sector Charlie, a block away from the chaos. Kalen slammed the heavy plate down as Bax scrambled out. They stood for a moment in the dim light of the bay, chests heaving, listening. The station's general alarms were now blaring. A calm, female, automated voice was issuing instructions. Containment breach registered in Sector Delta. All non-essential personnel report to designated safe zones. This is not a drill. Safe zones, Kalen panted, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. There are no safe zones. The sounds of the fight in the tunnels had stopped. There was only the alarm and the distant, terrifying chime. It was a sound of victory. "The drone," Bax said, his voice a low growl. His face was grim, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "We still need the drone." Kalen shook his head. "It's too late. The whole sector is on lockdown, we'll never get near it, and Valerius, he's going to pin this on us. The guards, the breach, everything." Their gambit for proof had failed spectacularly. They had not just failed to expose the conspiracy, they had triggered a catastrophe. They were no longer investigators. They were fugitives. "The warden," Bax said, his gaze fixed on the corridor outside the storage bay. "Go to the warden." "He'll kill us," Kalen countered. "He'll have us shot on sight." "He has no choice now," Bax reasoned, his logic cutting through Kalen's panic. "His cover-up is broken. The entity is out. His guards are dead. He needs us. He needs you. You are the only one who understands it." Kalen considered the silent man's words. It was a desperate, insane strategy. To walk into the lion's den while the prison burned around them. But Bax was right. The board had been shattered. The old rules no longer applied. Valerius's carefully constructed world of order was collapsing, and in that chaos there might be an opportunity. They made their way towards the central command spire. The corridors were a strange mix of deserted stretches and chaotic scenes. Inmates, freed from their cells by the power failures, were running wild in some areas. In others, terrified prisoners huddled together, looking for a guard, any authority figure to save them. The guards themselves were nowhere to be seen. They were either dead in Delta Block or rallying to form a perimeter. As they neared the command spire, they encountered a different kind of authority. A squad of 4 guards in full combat armor, their energy rifles held at the ready. They were an elite unit, the warden's personal guard. They blocked the corridor leading to the turbolift. "Halt," their leader commanded, his rifle leveled at Kalen's chest. "Jorik, you are under arrest for inciting a riot and murdering station personnel. Your men are dead because the warden kept a monster locked in his basement," Kalen shot back, his hands raised. "I'm not the enemy here." "He's lying," the guard said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "The warden warned us about him, said he was a cult leader, said he'd use the chaos to his advantage." Valerius was already spinning the narrative, painting Kalen as the villain. But before the guard could fire, another voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, Sergeant." Chief Guard Hamasaki emerged from a side corridor. His uniform was singed, his face smudged with soot. His expression was a mixture of exhaustion and profound shock. He had seen it. He had been there. "Chief," the sergeant said, confused. "The warden's orders were to—" "The warden is not in command of the situation," Hamasaki said, his voice heavy with a new, grim authority. He looked at Kalen, and for the first time there was no suspicion in his eyes, only a desperate, dawning understanding. "I was outside the perimeter. I heard the screams. I saw the energy readings. You were right." He turned to the sergeant. "He's going to see the warden. Let him through." The sergeant hesitated, torn between 2 authorities. Hamasaki took a step forward. "That thing killed my men. Valerius knew about it. He let them die to protect his career. Who are you taking orders from, Sergeant? A man who protects this station, or a man who feeds it to a monster?" The sergeant lowered his rifle. The other guards followed suit. Hamasaki nodded at Kalen. "Go, find out what he's really up to." The turbolift ride to the warden's office was silent. The panoramic viewport now showed a station in chaos. Lights flickered in distant sectors. The red pulse of emergency strobes was everywhere. And lament hung outside, serene, silent, and watchful, the source of it all. The doors to the office opened. Kalen stepped in, with backs a silent shadow behind him. The office was empty. The great chrome desk was clear. The chairs were perfectly aligned. But the warden was gone. Kalen walked to the desk. A single data slate lay in its center. He picked it up. The screen was active. It showed a single image, a schematic of a small, long-range shuttlecraft, and a flight plan, destination, a corporate headquarters in another system. The shuttle's launch sequence was timed for 10 minutes from now. "He's running," Kalen breathed. "He's abandoning the station." He swiped the screen. A pre-recorded, encrypted message began to play. It was addressed to the corporation's board of directors. Valerius's face appeared, calm and composed as ever. "As you can see from the enclosed data," his recorded voice began, "a catastrophic failure has occurred at the Penumbra Facility, instigated by a violent, cult-like uprising led by inmate Kalen Jorik. He and his followers sabotaged the station's core systems, leading to a massive loss of life. I have contained the situation as best I can, but the station is a total loss. I have evacuated to a secure location to ensure the integrity of my final report. My recommendation is to enact Protocol Cinder. Kalen's blood ran cold. He knew Protocol Cinder. It was the ultimate corporate failsafe, the complete remote scuttling of a facility. They would overload the station's reactor, vaporizing it and everyone inside to erase any evidence of wrongdoing. "He's going to blow the station," Kalen said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's going to erase the monster, the prisoners, the witnesses, all of it. He'll be a hero, the sole survivor of a tragic accident." Bax walked to the panoramic viewport. He looked down at the station, then out at the blackness of space. He pointed. "The hangar bay." Kalen followed his gaze. A small, sleek shuttle was visible, docked at an auxiliary bay at the base of the command spire. Valerius was going to slip away while his final report painted Kalen as the mass murderer. The desk comm chimed. Kalen hit the receive button. It was Hamasaki. "Jorik, what's going on? All the primary command functions are locked out. I can't access life support or internal security or the reactor controls. It's all been routed to the warden's personal terminal." "He's locked us out," Kalen said. "He's initiated Protocol Cinder. We have less than an hour before the reactor goes critical, and he's taking the only key with him." There was a moment of stunned silence from the other end of the comm. "We have to stop him," Hamasaki said, his voice tight with fury. "His shuttle is in the auxiliary hangar," Kalen replied. "We're going after him." He ended the transmission and looked at Bax. The mission had changed once again. It was no longer about proof. It was no longer about survival. It was a race to stop one man from murdering thousands to protect a lie, and a race against a ticking clock that would consume them all in fire. As they turned to leave, Kalen glanced at the viewport one last time. Lament hung in the void, a cold, indifferent god, and on its surface he saw it again. Not a flicker this time, but a slow, deliberate shift. A vast, continent-sized section of the moon's crust was sliding away, revealing a darkness beneath. Not the darkness of rock, but the absolute, star-devouring blackness of the void. A great eye was opening, waking from its eon-long slumber to watch the final act of the small, noisy creatures that had disturbed its sleep. The old one was finally paying attention. Chapter 7: The Cinder Protocol. The command spire, once the untouchable heart of the Warden's authority, had become the epicenter of their desperate race against annihilation. Kalen stood for a moment in the Warden's silent, empty office, the scale of Valerius's betrayal settling over him like a physical weight. The man wasn't just a conspirator. He was a nihilist, willing to burn an entire world to hide his sins. Protocol Cinder, a clean, corporate term for mass murder on an unprecedented scale. "The reactor," Kalen said, his mind sifting through the technical schematics he had studied out of sheer boredom months ago. "The overload sequence is automated. Once initiated from a master terminal, it can't be stopped locally. It's a closed loop. The only way to abort it is with a counter-command from the same master terminal. The warden's terminal, Bax stated, his voice a low growl. He was looking at the shuttle docked far below them. He takes the terminal, he takes the key. We can't let him leave the station, Kalen concluded. The plan was simple in its objective, but insane in its execution. They had to get from the top of the command spire to the auxiliary hangar bay at its base, through a station that was rapidly descending into chaos, and stop an armed, desperate man from making his escape. A chime from the desk console announced an incoming station-wide broadcast, not from Valerius this time, but from Hamasaki. The chief guard's face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim. To all remaining staff and residents, Hamasaki's voice boomed, overriding the automated alarms. Warden Valerius has abandoned his post. He has initiated a full station scuttling procedure, Protocol Cinder. The station reactor will overload in approximately 55 minutes. This is not a drill. I repeat, the station is set to self-destruct. Panic. Hamasaki had just thrown a match into a powder keg, but Kalen understood his reasoning. The chief guard was choosing an informed panic over a blind slaughter. He was giving people a chance, however slim. The hangar, Kalen said, turning to Bax. The turbolifts will be jammed with people trying to get to the main shuttle bays. We need another way down. Bax walked to the panoramic viewport. He looked not out but down, tracing the structure of the command spire itself. His thick finger tapped against the plasteel. Maintenance shafts. External. External, a spacewalk. The idea was terrifying, but the turbolifts were a death trap, and the stairwells would be a river of panicked bodies. Bax was right. The fastest way down was on the outside. They found the access point in a small service closet off the main office. A circular airlock designed for drone maintenance and emergency EVA. The closet held 2 standard emergency EVA suits. They were bulky, cumbersome things designed for repair work, not for speed. Kalen began the process of suiting up, his hands clumsy with urgency. The suit felt like a coffin. He sealed the helmet, and the world was reduced to the sound of his own ragged breathing and the soft hiss of the suit's internal atmosphere. Through his visor, he saw Bax don his own suit with a practiced, unhurried efficiency that spoke of a past life spent in the void. They cycled the airlock. The outer door slid open, revealing the silent, stardusted majesty of space, and the terrifying, sheer drop of the command spire. It was a metal cliff falling away into nothingness. A network of handholds and magnetic anchor points studded the spire's surface, a ladder that stretched for nearly a kilometer down to the ring of hangar bays. "Stay on the comm," Kalen's voice crackled through the suit's speakers. "Magnetic boots on full. We follow the primary maintenance line. It leads straight to the auxiliary hangar's EVA hatch." Bax gave a simple thumbs up, his face unreadable behind his own visor. He stepped out first, his magnetic boots clanging onto the spire's hull with absolute confidence. He moved with a low, zero-gravity grace, a powerful swimmer in an ocean of blackness. Kalen followed, his heart pounding in his ears. He forced himself not to look down. He focused on the handholds, on the secure clang of his boots with each step. One missed step, one magnetic failure, and he would simply fall away, a tiny, forgotten speck tumbling into the eternal night. The station was a cacophony below them. He could see it, even if he couldn't hear it. Flashing emergency lights, explosions from ruptured conduits in other sectors as systems began to fail, a stream of people pouring from the main airlocks, a futile attempt to escape in ships that would never be cleared for launch. It was a dying world. Halfway down the spire, a new horror unfolded. From the wounded, gaping maw of Delta Block, the entity emerged. It was not the single, man-shaped observer this time. It was a tide, a flowing, amorphous river of blackness that poured out of the station and began to spread across its hull. Inside the roiling void, Kalen could see 1,000 impossible shapes, geometries that twisted and broke, limbs that belonged to no known creature, faces frozen in silent screams. The entity was pulling the pieces of its victims from its own dimension and wearing them as a skin. The black tide flowed away from the command spire, spreading over the main rings of the prison. It was ignoring them. It seemed drawn to the largest concentrations of life, the safe zones Hamasaki had inadvertently turned into buffets. "It's evolving," Kalen whispered, his voice full of awe and terror. "It's adapting to the environment." Bax did not pause. He kept moving down, his pace steady, relentless. He was focused only on the mission. His discipline anchored Kalen, pulling him from the brink of horrified paralysis. They reached the level of the auxiliary hangar. The EVA hatch was a heavy, circular port, thankfully free of the entity's encroaching tide. A green light on its control panel indicated the internal atmosphere was still stable. Kalen worked the manual override. The hatch hissed open, and they scrambled inside, back into the reassuring gravity and sound of the station. They were in a small maintenance corridor directly behind the hangar bay. The sounds of the shuttle's pre-flight checks were loud here, a series of high-pitched whines and deep thumps. Valerius was close. They shed their EVA suits, their movements swift and urgent. They found the main door to the hangar. It was sealed. A small viewport in the door showed the scene inside. The sleek corporate shuttle rested on its launch cradle. At the base of the boarding ramp stood Warden Valerius. He was not alone. He was flanked by the 4 elite guards from the corridor, the same ones Hamasaki had convinced to stand down. Their loyalty, it seemed, had been bought back. Valerius was holding a reinforced data slate, the master terminal. He was typing a command. "The hangar doors," Kalen hissed. "He's opening the outer doors." They were out of time. They had to get through the door, past 4 heavily armed guards, and get the terminal from the warden. It was impossible. Bax looked at the sealed door. He looked at Kalen. Then he looked at a series of large, cylindrical canisters lined up against the corridor wall. They were labeled pressurized oxygen. Bax pointed at the canisters, then at the door. He didn't need to speak. Kalen understood the terrifying, suicidal logic, a makeshift breaching charge. "The explosion will vent the hangar's atmosphere," Kalen said, his mind racing. "We'll be blown out into space along with everyone else." Bax shook his head. He pointed to a small emergency locker on the far wall. Inside, Kalen could see two emergency breathers and a set of magnetic anchor cables. It was a plan born of pure desperation. They worked quickly. Bax, with his immense strength, positioned one of the heavy oxygen canisters against the door's locking mechanism. Kalen, his hands trembling, worked to rig the canister's valve to overload and rupture. It was a crude, unstable bomb. They donned the emergency breathers and clipped the magnetic anchors to their belts. Kalen looked through the viewport one last time. Valerius was finishing his commands. The massive outer hangar doors were beginning to slide open, revealing the star-dusted void beyond. "Now," Kalen yelled, his voice muffled by the breather. He activated the trigger. He and Bax scrambled back, slamming their magnetic anchors onto the metal floor of the corridor just as the canister exploded. The sound was a deafening metallic roar. The corridor door buckled, ripped from its hinges and flew into the hangar. A violent, explosive decompression followed. Air, equipment, and bodies were sucked out into the void. Kalen felt the cable on his belt snap taut, holding him against the hurricane of escaping atmosphere. He looked up. The four guards, caught by surprise, had been swept away, their bodies tumbling out into the blackness. Valerius, however, had been ready. He was anchored to the shuttle's boarding ramp, the precious master terminal clutched to his chest. He glared at Kalen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The hangar was now a vacuum, the only sounds the faint crackle of the comms. The shuttle was still docked. Valerius was still there, and the station's reactor was still counting down to zero. The first part of their plan had worked. Now they had to survive the second. Chapter 8: The Gravity of the Situation. The silence of the void-filled hangar was absolute. The violent hurricane of decompression had passed, leaving behind a scene of still, cold destruction. Loose equipment drifted in a slow, silent ballet. The bodies of the warden's elite guard tumbled slowly end over end into the starfield, swept away by the storm. Kalen clung to his magnetic anchor, his knuckles white, his breath fogging the inside of his emergency breather. Across the hangar, Valerius stood firm, anchored to the shuttle's ramp. The master terminal was strapped to his chest, its screen casting a faint, cold light on his face. His expression was one of pure fury. Kalen had not just ruined his escape, he had humiliated him. Bax was the first to move. He disengaged his anchor and pushed off the wall, his movements economical and powerful. He flew across the hangar, a human projectile aimed directly at the warden. Valerius, anticipating the move, unclipped a heavy-energy pistol from his belt. He fired. A bolt of brilliant blue energy shot across the hangar. Bax, with a grace that belied his size, twisted in midair. The bolt missed him by inches, searing a molten scar on the hangar wall behind him. Before Valerius could fire again, Bax crashed into him. The impact was brutal. The two men, locked together, slammed against the side of the shuttle. The master terminal clattered from the warden's grasp, its tether snapping. It floated free, tumbling slowly in the zero gravity between them. The key, the only thing that could stop the station from vaporizing. Kalen disengaged his own anchor and pushed off towards the drifting terminal. He was not a graceful zero-G navigator like Bax. His movement was clumsy, his trajectory off. He sailed past the terminal, his fingers grasping at empty air. He had to reorient, kicking off a floating cargo container to push himself back towards his goal. The fight between Bax and Valerius was a savage, silent brawl. Punches that would shatter bone in normal gravity were slow, telegraphed pushes in the void. It was a contest of leverage and mass. Valerius was wiry and quick, trying to use the shuttle's hull to his advantage, pushing off to gain momentum. Bax was a creature of raw power, his hands like vices, trying to immobilize the warden to crush him. Valerius managed to break free, pushing off Bax's chest. He aimed his pistol again, not at Bax but at Kalen, who was now just inches from the floating terminal. "The terminal is useless without my command codes, Jorik." The warden's voice snarled over the comm. "Surrender, or I will space you both and take my chances with the monster." Kalen's fingers wrapped around the edge of the terminal. He had it. He turned, pulling the terminal to his chest, just as Valerius fired. The energy bolt struck the cargo container Kalen had just used, vaporizing it in a silent flash of light. Bax used the moment to his advantage. He launched himself at Valerius again. This time he didn't grab the man. He grabbed the pistol. He wrenched it from the warden's hand, the metal groaning in protest. With a single, powerful motion, he spun and threw the weapon. It sailed out of the open hangar doors, disappearing into the vastness of space. Valerius was disarmed. He looked from his empty hand to the two men who had cornered him. His face twisted in a snarl of desperation. He turned and scrambled up the boarding ramp into his shuttle. A moment later, the ramp began to retract and the shuttle's main engines flared to life with a brilliant, silent flash. "He's still trying to leave," Kalen yelled. "Bax the docking clamps." At the base of the launch cradle were 4 massive magnetic clamps holding the shuttle to the station. Their manual release was a large lever on the control platform near the hangar doors. If Valerius couldn't override them from the cockpit in time, he would be trapped. Bax pushed off the shuttle, flying towards the control platform. At the same time, the shuttle's maneuvering thrusters fired. Valerius was not trying to escape. He was trying to pivot. The shuttle, still held by the clamps, groaned in protest, its nose turning slowly. It was aiming its main engine directly at Kalen. It was going to be a blowtorch of unimaginable power. "Kalen, move!" Bax roared over the comm. Kalen pushed off the floor, propelling himself upwards towards the hangar ceiling, the precious terminal clutched in his hands. He was too slow. The shuttle's main engine ignited. A colossal, silent spear of white-hot plasma filled the hangar. The heat was so intense, Kalen felt it even through the vacuum, a wave of pure radiation that washed over him. His breather's temperature warning shrieked in his ear. The world turned white. He slammed into the ceiling, the impact rattling his teeth. When his vision cleared, the hangar was transformed. The floor plates were glowing cherry red. The far wall was a molten, slagged ruin. The plasma blast had sterilized the entire bay. The shuttle's engine cut out. The ship sagged on its clamps, its engine glowing with residual heat. Had Bax made it? Kalen scanned the hangar desperately. He saw him. Bax had reached the control platform, but he had been caught by the edge of the plasma blast. His suit was blackened and scorched. He was clinging to the railing, motionless. "Bax," Kalen cried. Slowly, painfully, Bax pulled himself up. He looked at the lever for the docking clamps, then back at Kalen. He gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. He was too injured. He couldn't operate the release, but he could do something else. He placed his hands on the primary power conduit that fed the clamps. Even with his suit's thick gloves, the conduit was likely radiating immense heat. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he ripped the conduit from its housing. Sparks flew in a silent, brilliant shower. The magnetic clamps holding the shuttle died. Freed, the shuttle lurched forward, propelled by its last engine burst. It drifted out of the hangar bay, its engines sputtering, clearly damaged by the strain. It was free. Valerius had won. But as the shuttle cleared the station, it began to list to one side. Its trajectory was erratic. From the command spire high above, the amorphous black tide of the entity, the Gestalt consciousness of its victims, had seen the shuttle's escape. It had been focused on the main station, but this bright, hot, moving thing had attracted its ancient attention. A single, massive tendril of the black void detached from the station. It moved with an incredible, unnatural speed, a spear of living darkness aimed at the fleeing shuttle. Valerius saw it coming. Through the shuttle's cockpit window, Kalen could see the warden's face, pale with a new, more profound terror than any Kalen could have inflicted. The entity's tendril struck the shuttle. It did not tear it apart, it simply enveloped it. The shuttle, with the warden inside, was absorbed into the blackness. The void pulsed once, a silent beat of triumph, and then retracted, pulling its prize back towards the main mass of the entity that was consuming the station. Valerius was gone. The master terminal was safe in Kalen's hands, but the key was useless without the password, and the only man who knew it had just been devoured by a god from the moon. Kalen floated in the ruined hangar, a new, colder despair washing over him. He looked at the terminal. It was their only hope. He had to get through the warden's encryption. The fate of everyone left alive on the Penumbra Facility depended on it. He pushed off the ceiling, drifting towards the scorched platform where Bax was slumped. Hopping, the man was still alive. They had won the battle, but the war for survival had just entered a new, desperate phase. Chapter 9: The Ghost in the Machine. The hangar was a tomb. The silence was broken only by the frantic hiss of Kalen's own breathing and the shrill, persistent alarm from his suit's temperature gauge. He drifted towards the control platform where Bax was slumped over the railing. The silent giant suit was a ruin of blackened, melted composite material. The plasma wash had cooked him. "Bax," Kalen said, his voice a choked whisper into the calm. He reached the platform and clamped his boots down. He put a hand on Bax's shoulder. There was no response. With a surge of adrenaline, Kalen pulled the larger man around. Bax's face was visible through the cracked, crazed visor of his helmet. His skin was burned, his eyes were closed, but he was breathing. Faint, shallow puffs of condensation appeared on the inside of his visor. He was alive, unconscious but alive. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, flooded Kalen. He couldn't have done this alone, and he couldn't finish it alone. He looked from Bax's burned face to the master terminal clutched in his own hands. Its screen glowed with a single prompt: Enter command CODES. Below it, a timer showed the grim reality of their situation. Reactor overload in 38 minutes. The codes. Valerius had taken them to his grave, a grave that was now the belly of a cosmic horror. Kalen's mind raced. There had to be a way, a backdoor, a failsafe. Valerius was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He would have a contingency. "Hamasaki," Kalen said into his suit's comm, switching to the chief guard's channel. "Hamasaki, do you read me?" Static, then a strained voice. "Jorik, what happened? We saw the shuttle. We saw that thing." "Valerius is gone," Kalen said, his voice flat. "The entity took him, but I have the master terminal. The problem is it's locked. I need his command codes to abort Protocol Cinder." There was a pause on the other end. "The codes are known only to the Warden. They're biometrically linked and changed weekly. There's no way to bypass them." "There has to be," Kalen insisted, a new desperation creeping into his voice. "A corporate override, a maintenance key." "Nothing," Hamasaki replied, his voice grim. "Protocol Cinder is designed to be unstoppable once engaged. It's the final word. We're out of time." Kalen looked at the timer. 37 minutes. He looked at the unconscious form of Bax. He looked out the open hangar doors at the station, being slowly consumed by the living darkness that had bled from the moon. This couldn't be the end. He began to work on the terminal, his fingers flying across the touchscreen interface. He tried every standard override he could think of. He tried to force it into a diagnostic mode. He tried to trigger a hard reset. Each attempt was met with the same cold, unforgiving message: access denied. The terminal was a fortress, but every fortress has a flaw. He thought back to Corbin Vash, the paranoid genius, to Pippa, the frightened hacker. They didn't break through walls, they found the cracks. Valerius's psychology, that was the key. The man was a narcissist, obsessed with his own image, his own control. His password wouldn't be random. It would be something personal, something that reinforced his own sense of power. "Hamasaki," Kalen said, "I need access to the Warden's personal files, everything you have. His service record, his commendations, his psychological profile." "What for?" the chief guard asked, confused. "I'm not trying to break the lock," Kalen explained. "I'm trying to pick it. I need to know how his mind works." "I'll send you what I can," Hamasaki said. A moment later, a data packet was transferred to Kalen's suit computer. He opened the files, his eyes scanning the information displayed in the corner of his helmet. HUD. Valerius's service record was a testament to ruthless efficiency. Promotions, commendations for maintaining order in other volatile facilities. There were notes about his unwavering commitment to corporate doctrine. Then Kalen found the psych profile. Subject exhibits strong narcissistic tendencies, a pronounced messiah complex, views subordinates not as people but as tools to achieve his objectives. It was all there. Kalen began trying passwords based on the profile: order, control, VALERIUS alpha, Penumbra prime. Access DENIED. Access DENIED. Access DENIED. 32 minutes. He was thinking like a technician. He needed to think like a poet of power. What was the ultimate expression of the warden's philosophy? What single phrase encapsulated his entire worldview? He remembered the warden's speech, the one he had given in his office. "I am the cure." He had called fear a virus. He saw himself as the antibody. Kalen's fingers typed the words, "I am THECURE." Access DENIED. He tried again, FVARISAVIRUS. Access DENIED. Frustration and despair began to set in. He was wasting time. The station was dying. He looked at Bax. The man's life depended on him. Everyone's life depended on him. He looked at the files again. There was one detail he had overlooked: a redacted file, an early assignment, a posting at a corporate re-education facility on a remote colony. The details were sealed, but the facility's name was there. Acheron, in mythology, the river of pain. What had happened at Acheron? What lesson had Valerius learned there? He thought back to the ghost in the machine, Corbin's echo program, the data that Valerius had erased. The warden wasn't just hiding the entity, he was hiding his own history, the patterns. It was all about the patterns. He pulled up the geological survey logs again, the ones he had seen in the comm station. The resonance patterns, the language the surveyor had mentioned. He cross-referenced it with the energy signatures from Fisk's and Corbin's disappearances. It was the same frequency, the same signature. What if Valerius wasn't just covering up the monster? What if he was trying to control it? A new, horrifying thought bloomed in Kalen's mind. The warden's password wasn't a word. It was a command, a piece of the entity's own language, a sequence of the resonance patterns that he had somehow learned to harness. He pulled up the visual representation of the resonance frequency. It was a complex wave, a series of peaks and troughs, not an alphanumeric code, a mathematical one. The terminal had a scientific notation input. He began to transcribe the core sequence of the resonance pattern. It was a desperate, insane long shot. He entered the last number and held his breath. Command sequence recognized. The terminal flashed. "Welcome, Warden." He was in. A wave of triumphant relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over him. He had done it. He had thought like his enemy. He navigated to the protocol sender command. The screen showed a terrifying graphic of the station's reactor, its core glowing an angry red. A countdown timer showed 26 minutes remaining. An option flashed below it: abort sequence. Kalen jabbed his finger at the screen. "Confirm abort," the terminal demanded. "Enter Warden's voice command." A voice lock, a second layer of security. Kalen's heart sank. It was over. He could never replicate the Warden's voice. They were still going to die. He stared at the prompt, his mind a blank wall of despair. Then an idea sparked. A ghost, a memory. The Warden's final message to the corporation. The one he had found in the office. He still had the file in his suit's computer. He accessed the recording. He found the section where Valerius spoke with particular clarity. his voice full of his own authority. He held his suit's comlink speaker up to the terminal's microphone. He played the clip. "And my final report," the warden's recorded voice said. "My recommendation is to enact Protocol Cinder." The terminal's microphone icon flashed green. VoicePrint VERIFIED. Protocol Cinder abort sequence initiated. The angry red graphic of the reactor core on the screen turned to a cool, stable blue. The countdown timer vanished. He had done it. The station was safe, for now. A groan from beside him made him turn. Bax was stirring. His eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused and full of pain. "Kalen," he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. "I'm here," Kalen said, relief choking his voice. "I did it, Bax. I stopped the countdown." Bax did not look relieved. He looked terrified. He lifted a trembling, scorched hand and pointed out the open hangar doors. "The moon," he whispered. Kalen looked. The great eye that had opened on the lunar surface was now fully revealed. The chasm was miles wide, a wound of absolute blackness, and from that wound something was rising. It was not a tide or a tendril. It was a form, a physical body, a colossal, hulking shape that dwarfed the station, a being made of the same cold, dead rock as the moon itself. It was unfolding itself, a mountain god awakening from its slumber, the lunar progenitor, the Old One itself. It had been studying them, it had been tasting them, but now its patience was at an end. The remote analysis was over. The primary specimen was coming to dissect its experiment personally. They had saved the station from the warden, only to offer it up on a platter to a being that dwarfed their comprehension. The new horror was not that they were going to die. It was that their entire world was about to become a laboratory. Chapter 10. The Hunger of the Void. The awakening of the lunar progenitor was an event that transcended sound. It was a silent, planetary-scale birth that ripped through the station as a wave of pure gravitational distortion. The metal plates of the hangar floor buckled and groaned. Loose objects, once drifting in the serene ballet of zero-G, were suddenly pulled towards the open hangar doors as if caught in a tide. Kalen had to brace himself against the control platform to keep from being dragged into the void. Outside, the Old One continued its ascent from the lunar chasm. Its form defied easy description. It had a vaguely humanoid torso and colossal, craggy arms that seemed to end in sharpened mountain peaks, but its head was a swirling vortex of stellar dust and captured light, a miniature galaxy of cold, indifferent stars. Its body was not merely made of rock. It was a living geology, with canyons for wrinkles and tectonic plates for skin. The scale of it was so immense that Kalen's mind struggled to process it, reducing it to a single, primal understanding. They were ants watching their hill kick over. "Hamasaki," Kalen yelled into the calm, his voice tight with a new kind of terror. "The entity, it's outside, it's big." That was the only word his stunned mind could produce. The chief guard's reply was strained, filled with static and the sounds of chaos. "We see it, Jorik. We're seeing it on every external sensor. It's God, it's the size of a city. The station's gravity is fluctuating. We're losing orbital stability." The progenitor was not just a being. It was a gravity well. Its very presence was warping the fabric of spacetime around it, pulling the Penumbra Facility out of its stable orbit. They were not just being threatened, they were being reeled in like a fish on a line. Kalen looked at Bax, who was struggling to sit up, his burned suit crackling with every movement. The silent giant's eyes were fixed on the entity, but his expression was not one of fear. It was one of grim, stoic acceptance, the look of a warrior who finally sees the chieftain of the army he is fated to fight. The entity's vortex of a head turned. The swirling galaxy of stars focused on the small, wounded space station. A new wave of psychic pressure washed over them, 1,000 times stronger than before. It was not the cold curiosity of the observer. It was a declaration, a statement of ownership. It was the feeling of a master returning to his workshop to find the tools have misbehaved. And then the black tide on the station's hull responded. The amorphous void, the Gestalt consciousness of Valerius and all the other victims, pulsed with light. It began to pull back from the station, retracting from the corridors and observation decks it had infested. It flowed across the station's skin, a river of souls heading towards the open hangar bay. It was being recalled. "It's coming back," Kalen shouted, a fresh wave of panic rising in him. "The entity is calling its pieces home." The black tide poured into the hangar, a silent, terrifying waterfall of pure void. It did not attack them. It flowed around them, around the scorched platform and the drifting debris, a river dividing around a stone. It streamed past them and out into space, a bridge of darkness connecting the station to the colossal, waiting form of the progenitor. The souls of the dead were being reabsorbed, their knowledge, their memories, their pain, all being drawn back into the main consciousness. The field study was over, and the data was being collected. Kalen and Bax could only watch, paralyzed, as the last vestiges of their fallen comrades were fed to their killer. As the final strand of the black tide left the hangar, the station gave a violent lurch. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, save for the faint, ambient light of the stars and the swirling vortex of the progenitor's head. The emergency power kicked in a moment later, casting the ruined hangar in a dim, pulsing red. "Jorik, what's your status?" Hamasaki's voice crackled. "We've lost main power. The reactor is stable, but the backup generators won't hold for long. And our orbit, it's decaying fast, will impact the lunar surface in less than 2 hours." 2 hours. That was their new deadline. Not a chemically induced stupor, not a fiery explosion, but a crushing, final impact with the surface of the moon where a god was waiting for them. "We have to get out of here," Kalen said, his voice numb. "Get to the main shuttle bay. There have to be other ships." "The main bay is chaos," Hamasaki reported. "Riots. People are killing each other for a seat on a transport that has nowhere to go, and that thing is between us and any viable escape vector." They were trapped, utterly and completely. Kalen's mind, a place of logic and reason, was fraying at the edges. He looked at the progenitor. It was not attacking. It was simply waiting for them to fall. It was savoring the moment. "We can't run," Kalen said, a strange, fatalistic calm settling over him. "So we have to fight." The statement was so absurd that Hamasaki's laughter, a harsh, humorless bark, came over the calm. Fight. Fight what, Jorik, a god? We don't have a weapon that could scratch it. No, Kalen agreed. We can't kill it, but maybe we can hurt it. Maybe we can push it back. Give us enough time to get the station clear. He looked at the master terminal still clutched in his hand. He looked at the empty hangar. He thought of the shuttle, the station systems, the reactor. The pieces of a plan, a wild, desperate, impossible plan, began to form in his mind. Its power comes from the moon, Kalen theorized, thinking out loud. The resonance, the energy it uses to project itself, to warp gravity. It's all being drawn from a source deep inside Lament. If we can disrupt that source. How? Hamasaki pressed. The station's reactor, Kalen said, the idea taking full shape. We can't stop the overload now, but maybe we can direct it. Turn the entire station into a directed energy weapon, a shaped charge. We vent the entire output of the overloading reactor in a focused beam, straight into the heart of the chasm the progenitor came from. It might not kill it, but it would be like cutting its power cord. There was a long silence on the comm. Kalen could hear Hamasaki breathing. He could almost hear the man weighing the sheer insanity of the plan against the certainty of their impending doom. Even if that could work, Hamasaki said finally, how do we aim the station? It's not a ship. It's a rock with engines that are failing. Backs, Kalen said, looking at the wounded giant. The docking clamps in this hangar, the conduit you ripped out. Could you reverse it? Create a massive, focused magnetic pulse? Backs, leaning heavily on the railing, looked at the ruined conduit, then at the progenitor. He seemed to be calculating, weighing his own remaining strength against the physics of the problem. He gave a slow, pained nod. A magnetic pulse, Kalen continued, the plan solidifying. We could use it like a railgun. The station is the projectile. We fire a magnetic burst at the moon. The opposing magnetic fields would push us. It could give us the momentum we need to correct our course and aim the reactor blast. This is insane, Hamasaki whispered. You're talking about turning the station into a bomb and a cannon at the same time. It's the only plan we have, Kalen said. I can reinitiate the overload sequence from the warden's terminal. I can control the venting process. But I need you to get the station ready. I need every ounce of power from the backup generators routed to the reactor's containment field and the hangar's magnetic coil. And I need you to get everyone left alive onto the few remaining escape shuttles. We're going to give them one shot to get clear. Another silence. Then a new voice on the comm. Pippa. The young hacker sounded terrified, but her voice was clear. I can do it, she said. I can reroute the power. I've been in the system. I know the pathways. Tell me what to do. Hamasaki made his decision. All right, Jorik, we're all in. What's the first step? Get Bax to an infirmary, Kalen said, looking at his fallen comrade. He's no good to us unconscious. Pippa, I'm sending you the power specifications now. Hamasaki, gather your remaining guards. You have to clear a path to the shuttles and hold it, no matter what. A team of guards arrived minutes later, their faces a mixture of fear and newfound resolve. They carefully loaded Bax onto a floating stretcher. As they carried him away, Bax's eyes opened. He looked at Kalen, a silent question in his gaze. "I have a plan," Kalen said. "I need you alive to finish it." Bax gave a faint nod of understanding and closed his eyes. Left alone in the ruined hangar, Kalen looked out at the progenitor. The cosmic being had not moved. It simply floated there, a silent mountain in the void, watching, waiting for the inevitable. It had all the time in the world. Kalen had less than 2 hours. He sat down at the scorched control platform, the warden's terminal in his lap. He had to become a monster himself. He had to willingly set the doomsday clock ticking again, condemning the station he was trying to save. His finger hovered over the screen, over the command that would once again begin the station's final countdown. The war for survival was over. The suicide mission had begun. Chapter 11: The Conductor of the Damned. The warden's terminal felt profane in Kalen's hands. It was an instrument of absolute control, designed for a man who believed himself a god. Now Kalen had to use it to play God himself. He navigated to the reactor controls, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. The option was still there, a single, terrible button: Reinitiate Protocol Cinder. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, he pressed it. The terminal demanded confirmation, then the voice command. Kalen played the recording of Valerius's voice again. The cold, dead words echoed in the ruined hangar. Voiceprint verified. Protocol Cinder reinitiated. The countdown timer reappeared on the screen. It started at 90 minutes, a small mercy. He had given them a little more time. A low, deep groan vibrated through the station. It was the sound of the reactor's magnetic containment field beginning to strain, of the core's fission process being artificially accelerated. The Penumbra Facility was once again a dying star. "It's done," Kalen transmitted to Hamasaki and Pippa. "The clock is ticking. Pippa, how are the power relays?" "I'm in," the young hacker's voice came back, strained but determined. "The warden's lockout is still in effect, but the Echo command Corbin built has a subroutine. It can create phantom signals. I'm using them to trick the system into rerouting power from life support in the deserted blocks. It's working. The charge in the hangar's magnetic coils is building." "Good," Kalen said. "Hamasaki, what's the situation in the main bay?" "It's a war zone," the chief guard reported grimly. "Gangs are fighting my men for control of the shuttles. We're holding the line at Bay 7, where the 2 largest transports are docked, but we're taking casualties." "You have to hold," Kalen urged. "Those transports are the only lifeboats we have." For the next hour, Kalen became the conductor of a symphony of desperation. He sat on the scorched floor of the hangar, the warden's terminal on his lap, a ghost at the center of a web of chaos. He monitored the reactor's decay, tweaking the energy flow to keep it from going critical too soon. He coordinated with Pippa, directing her to pull power from every non-essential system, turning the station into a cold, dark tomb to feed their weapon. He listened to Hamasaki's reports from the front line, the sounds of gunfire, and screams a grim backdrop to his work. He was waging a war on 3 fronts: a technical war against the station's systems, a strategic war against the rioting inmates, and a psychological war against the colossal, silent being that hung in the void outside, watching his every move. The progenitor remained impassive. It did not seem to care about the internal struggles of the station. It had declared its intent, and now it was simply waiting for its prize to fall into its grasp. Its stillness was more unnerving than any attack. It was the patience of a predator that knows its prey is already cornered. An hour into the countdown, a new alert flashed on Kalen's terminal. An unauthorized access attempt at the medical bay's primary systems. "Pippa, is that you?" Kalen asked. "No," she replied, her voice tight with confusion. "That's not my signature." Kalen's blood ran cold. He zoomed in on the med bay's schematic. The access was coming from the surgical suite, the same suite where Bax was being treated. He opened a comm channel to the infirmary's guard post. There was no answer. A moment later, the access attempt was successful. The med bay's internal doors were locked down. Its systems were firewalled from the rest of the station. Whoever was inside had just created their own private kingdom. And then a new message appeared on Kalen's screen. It was not a system alert. It was a direct text communication, routed through the med bay's isolated server. "The big one is impressive," the message read, "but its methods are crude. A surgeon should be precise." Kalen stared at the words. He knew that clinical, detached tone. It was a voice he had heard in his nightmares. "Dr. Madsen," Kalen typed back, his hands shaking. "The warden underestimated me," the reply came. "He saw me as a tool, a cog in his machine of denial. He never considered that I might have my own research interests." Dr. Lena Madsen, the tired, overworked doctor who had been forced to sign the falsified death certificates. She had not been an unwilling participant. She had been a rival scientist. "What have you done?" Kalen typed. "An upgrade," the message read. "Your giant is a fascinating specimen. Such resilience, such potential. I have simply enhanced it." The warden's files contained some fascinating research on alien biological integration. The symbiote project he abandoned. I found it to be quite viable. A live video feed popped up on Kalen's screen. It was from the surgical suite. Bax was strapped to an operating table. He was no longer unconscious. His eyes were open, wide with a mixture of agony and terror. His body was convulsing. His skin was rippling as if something were moving beneath it. Black, vein-like tendrils were spreading from a device attached to his chest, integrating with his flesh. Dr. Madsen appeared in the frame. She was no longer the tired, defeated woman Kalen remembered. Her eyes were bright with a feverish, ecstatic energy. She was wearing a surgical mask, but her smile was evident. She held up a syringe filled with a pulsating black fluid. "The progenitor wants to dissect us," she said, her voice coming through the video feed's audio. "A worthy goal, but I believe in a more collaborative approach. Assimilation. Why be the specimen when you can become a part of the scientist?" She injected the black fluid into Bax. He roared, a sound of pure, inhuman agony that was cut short as his body arched violently against the restraints. The black tendrils covering his body pulsed and grew, encasing him in a chrysalis of living, alien tissue. The video feed cut out. Kalen stared at the blank screen, horrified. He had saved Bax from the fire only to deliver him to a mad woman. He had been so focused on the god outside that he had forgotten about the monsters within. A new countdown appeared on his screen, this one from the med bay. Integration complete in 15 minutas. The station's main timer read 22 minutes. He was out of time and he had just lost his primary weapon. The magnetic pulse, the key to their entire plan, required Bax's strength. Without him, they were just a falling, dying bomb. His comm chimed. It was Hamasaki. "Jorik, we can't hold them back any longer. The rioters have breached our perimeter. They're storming the shuttles." Everything was collapsing at once. The plan was in ruins. Kalen let his head fall into his hands. He was defeated. He had failed. He looked out the open hangar doors at the progenitor. Its starry head seemed to mock him, a vortex of cold, triumphant light. But as he stared into that vortex, he saw something. An idea sparked, born of absolute, final desperation. He remembered the observer, the man-shaped hole that had been the entity's projection. He remembered the warden's password, the resonance frequency that had acted as a command. The progenitor wasn't just a physical being. It was a psychic one. It communicated through patterns, through frequencies. And the warden's terminal was a powerful transmitter. He began to type, his fingers a blur. He was not trying to control the station's systems. He was writing a message. He pulled up the file on the silent geometry, the impossible, non-Euclidean shape that was the entity's signature. He converted its mathematical properties into a data stream. He was creating a signal, a focused beam of pure information. "Pippa," he said into the comm, his voice a low, intense whisper. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to turn the station's main comms dish into a focused transmitter. I'm going to send a signal, a message. I need you to aim it directly at the progenitor's head." "A message?" Pippa asked, her voice filled with confusion. "What are you trying to say to it?" "I'm not trying to talk to it," Kalen replied, a grim, terrifying smile touching his lips. "I'm trying to show it something. The warden was a narcissist. But what about a god? What is the one thing a being of that scale could not stand?" He finished his work. He had embedded the data stream of the silent geometry inside a recursive loop, a feedback loop, a signal that fed upon itself, growing exponentially in complexity and intensity with each nanosecond. It was a piece of mathematical poison, an idea virus. "What can it stand?" Pippa asked, her voice trembling. "A mirror," Kalen said. "I'm going to show it itself." Chapter 12. The Sound of a Falling God. The final minutes of the Penumbra Facility were a frantic, desperate crescendo. Kalen worked with a singular, feverish focus, the warden's terminal burning hot on his lap. He was no longer a scientist or a prisoner. He was a bomb maker, an artist of chaos, crafting a weapon made not of explosives, but of pure, weaponized self-awareness. "The comms dish is aligned," Pippa's voice crackled, laced with the static of a dying station. I've routed all remaining power from the secondary systems. It's not much, but the signal will be focused. Whatever you're sending, it's ready." "Hamasaki," Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the timer. "Get the shuttles out. Now. Launch them whether they are full or not. Get them clear of the station. That's an order." "They won't get far," the chief guard retorted. "That thing is creating a gravity well. They'll be pulled back in." "Just launch them," Kalen commanded. "The explosion from the reactor might create a shockwave, a push. It's their only chance. Go." He heard Hamasaki shouting orders in the background, the sounds of a chaotic, last-minute evacuation. He trusted the chief guard to do what was necessary. Now it was his turn. He looked at the message he had crafted, the recursive loop of the silent geometry, a snake eating its own tail for eternity. It was the digital equivalent of pointing two mirrors at each other, creating an infinite corridor of reflection. What would that do to a consciousness as vast and as ancient as the progenitor? He was about to find out. His finger hovered over the transmit button. This was it, the final, desperate throw of the dice. He pressed it. A low hum started in the station, different from the thrum of the reactor. It was the sound of the main comms dish powering up, focusing a beam of pure data across the void. The signal, invisible to the naked eye, shot across the space between the station and the progenitor, a silent spear aimed at the swirling galaxy of its head. For a moment nothing happened. The progenitor remained still, a mountain of silent indifference. Kalen's heart sank. It had failed. The idea was too small, too human to affect such a being. Then the vortex of the progenitor's head flickered. The swirling stars within it began to move faster, their placid dance turning into a frantic, chaotic spiral. The entire colossal form of the entity shuddered, a geological tremor that sent ripples across its rocky skin. It was as if the signal had bypassed its physical form and struck directly at its consciousness. The psychic pressure that had been bearing down on the station vanished, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated confusion. It was the feeling of a god looking in a mirror for the first time and not understanding what it was seeing. The recursive loop was forcing the entity to perceive its own infinite nature, a concept so vast it was causing a feedback loop in its own mind. The progenitor raised one of its colossal mountain peak arms. It was not an attack. It was a gesture of pain. It brought its hand to its head, to the swirling vortex of stars, as if trying to swat away a pesky fly. The station's countdown timer hit 5 minutes. "It's working," Kalen breathed, a wild, incredulous laugh bubbling in his chest. "It's actually working." The progenitor was distracted. It was wounded psychically. But it was still a physical object, a gravity well that was pulling them to their doom. His plan had bought the shuttles a chance, but it hadn't saved the station. It hadn't saved him. He needed the magnetic pulse. He needed backs. As if summoned by the thought, a new message flashed on his screen. From the med bay. "Integration complete. Subject UNLEASHED." The doors to the hangar, the ones leading back into the station, were ripped from their frames. They flew across the bay, crumpling against the far wall. Standing in the mangled doorway was a new kind of monster. It was Bax, but it was not. His massive frame was now encased in a shell of glistening, black, organic armor. The symbiote had not just covered him, it had merged with him. Tubes and tendrils snaked across his body, pulsing with a faint, internal light. His face was a fusion of his own grim features and a segmented, insect-like carapace. His eyes glowed with the same malevolent intelligence as Dr. Madsen. A beautiful synthesis, don't you think? Dr. Madsen's voice came from a small speaker on the creature's chest. She was a part of it now, a passenger in the body of the war machine she had created. The strength of the primitive, guided by the intellect of the sophisticated. The creature took a step into the hangar, its heavy feet clanging on the deck. It looked at the terminal in Kalen's hands, then out at the writhing, distracted progenitor. "The sample is magnificent," Madsen continued, her voice laced with scientific ecstasy. "But the delivery system is crude. Give me the terminal, Kalen. I can interface with the progenitor directly. I can take control. I can become the god you were only pretending to be." Kalen stood up, placing himself between the monster and the control platform. "You're insane," he said. "Insanity is a matter of perspective," the creature rumbled, its voice a horrific chorus of Bax's deep bass and Madsen's sharp cadence. "Now give me the terminal." It charged. Kalen was no fighter. He was a scientist. He dodged to the side as the monster crashed past him, its arms swiping at the air where he had been. He scrambled away, back towards the open void of the hangar doors. The countdown timer hit 2 minutes. The station groaned, its orbit decaying rapidly. They were in the final plunge. The back screecher turned, its glowing eyes locking onto Kalen. It was faster than it had any right to be. It was about to charge again when it paused. Its head tilted, and a flicker of the old backs, a glimmer of confusion crossed its face. It looked at its own hands, at the black, armored claws they had become. The real Bax was still in there, fighting for control. "Bax," Kalen yelled, seizing the opportunity. "Fight her. It's your body, it's your choice." The creature roared in frustration, a sound of two minds at war. It clutched its head, staggering. "Silence, you brute!" Madsen's voice shrieked from its chest. Kalen saw his chance. It was not about fighting the monster. It was about helping the man inside it. "The pulse backs," Kalen shouted, pointing at the ruined power conduit. "The plan, we have to fire the cannon." The creature looked at the conduit, then at the progenitor, then back at Kalen. The internal war was reaching its peak. The station lurched violently. The final death throes. The reactor was seconds from going critical. With a final, heroic effort, the man within the monster won. The creature let out a roar, but this time it was a roar of pure, defiant will. Bax's will. It ignored Kalen and charged towards the control platform. It plunged its armored hands into the sparking, ruined mess of the power conduit. "No, what are you doing?" Madsen's voice screamed. "You're overloading the symbiote, you'll kill us both." The creature did not listen. It channeled the raw, unshielded power of the station's backup generators directly into its own augmented body. Electricity arced across its black carapace. The tubes and tendrils covering it began to glow, first white, then an angry red. It was turning itself into a living conductor. It then placed its hands on the magnetic coil of the docking clamp. It roared, a final, triumphant sound of sacrifice, as it unleashed a torrent of energy. A massive, invisible wave of magnetic force erupted from the hangar. It was a silent thunderclap that slammed into the surface of the moon. The repulsive force was immense. The entire Penumbra Facility, a structure weighing millions of tons, was shoved violently backwards, away from the moon. Its fatal plunge was arrested and turned into a desperate, final push away from its doom. At the same time, the station's reactor finally went critical. Kalen, anchored to the floor, could only watch. From the station's core, a beam of pure, white-hot energy, the vented soul of the dying reactor, erupted. Guided by the magnetic pulse, the beam did not dissipate. It held its form, a perfect, incandescent spear that crossed the void and plunged directly into the chasm on the moon's surface from which the progenitor had risen. The impact was silent, but the effect was absolute. The moon's surface cracked. A network of glowing fissures spread from the chasm like a stone shattering in slow motion. The progenitor, its connection to its power source severed, let out a final, silent, psychic scream of agony and disbelief. Its colossal form began to crumble, its living rock turning to dead dust. It fell back into the chasm, a dying god returning to its tomb. The shockwave from the reactor's explosion hit the fleeing shuttles, a wave of pure force that pushed them, tumbling and spinning, away from the chaos and into the safety of deep space. Back in the hangar, the creature that had been Bax collapsed, the light in its eyes fading. The symbiote, overloaded and dead, crumbled away, leaving the burned, broken body of a man who had given his life to save them all. The Penumbra Facility, its final act complete, began to break apart, its mission over. Kalen, alone in the center of the destruction, floated in the silence, watching the god die, watching the station die, a solitary survivor in a graveyard of cosmic proportions. He had won, but he had lost everything in the process. Chapter 13: The Silence of the Stars. The aftermath was not a roaring crescendo, but a slow, fading whisper. The Penumbra Facility, its structural integrity annihilated by the final, desperate gambit, did not explode in a cinematic fireball. It died a death of 1,000 cuts. Sections tore away, drifting into the void like metallic icebergs. Lights flickered out block by block. The silence was absolute, a profound emptiness that rushed in to fill the space where the hum of life and the scream of a dying god had been. Kalen floated in the ruin of the auxiliary hangar. The master terminal its purpose served had drifted from his grasp, its screen dark. His emergency breather hissed, a lonely sound in the cathedral of destruction. He was alive, but he felt like a ghost, the last conscious thought of a dead mind. He looked at the moon. Lament. It was no longer a perfect, pockmarked sphere. It was a fractured globe, a web of glowing, cooling fissures spreading from the great chasm. The wound he had inflicted was a scar on a celestial scale. The progenitor was gone, its psychic pressure a mere memory, like the phantom limb of a god. The silence in his mind was as vast and empty as the space around him. He pushed off the wrecked platform, his movements slow and weary, and drifted towards the body of Bax. The symbiote had flaked away into dust, leaving only the man. He was burned, broken, but his face in death was peaceful. He was no longer the silent giant, the dumb ox, the inmate. He was a soldier who had died at his post. Kalen reached out and gently closed the man's eyes. There were no words. In the silent void, no eulogy was needed. The sacrifice spoke for itself. A faint, flashing light caught his attention. A personal locator beacon attached to his suit. It was receiving a signal. He activated his comm, his voice a dry rasp. "This is Jorik. We see you." The voice was Hamasaki's, faint and riddled with static, but there. "We're coming about. One of the transports is still functional. Barely. We're coming back for you." Hope. It was a foreign, almost painful sensation. Kalen watched as one of the distant, tumbling shapes resolved into a transport shuttle. It was scarred and damaged, one of its engines sputtering, but it was moving. It was coming for him. The rescue was a clumsy, desperate affair. They could not dock. Hamasaki, clad in an EVA suit, had to perform a tethered spacewalk, clipping a line onto Kalen's suit and physically dragging him across the void. As he was pulled away from the wreckage of the hangar, Kalen looked back one last time at the floating, still form of Bax, a silent monument in a field of dead stars. The inside of the transport was a scene from a nightmare. It was overcrowded, filled with the survivors. Guards and inmates, their former roles meaningless, were crammed together. Their faces were shell-shocked, their eyes wide with the things they had seen. Pippa was there, huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth. She looked up as Kalen entered, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had rooted the power. She had aimed the cannon. She was a hero and she was broken. Hamasaki helped Kalen remove his breather. The recycled air of the transport tasted sweet. "How many?" Kalen asked, his voice raw. 212, the chief guard replied, his voice heavy. "Out of a population of over 3,000, we are all that's left." The transport's engines groaned as it turned, pulling away from the graveyard of the Penumbra Facility and its fractured moon. No one spoke. They just watched through the viewport as their former prison, their former world, grew smaller. They drifted for what felt like an eternity. The transport systems were failing. Life support was minimal. They were a lifeboat in the middle of a cosmic ocean, with no guarantee of rescue. Days later, a new light appeared. A corporate cruiser, sleek and predatory, responding to the transport's distress signal. It locked onto them, its docking bay opening like the maw of a shark. "Salvation," someone whispered. Kalen knew better. It was merely a different kind of monster. Men in sterile, corporate security uniforms boarded the transport. They were not a rescue team. They were an audit team. They separated the inmates from the former guards. They took Hamasaki and Kalen into custody. Kalen found himself in a sterile, white room aboard the corporate cruiser. It was not a cell, but it was a cage all the same. A man in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit entered. He was not a guard or a soldier. He was a lawyer, an executive, a cleaner. "Kalen Jorik," the man said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. He sat opposite Kalen. "My name is irrelevant. I am here on behalf of the board of directors. You have caused the corporation a significant financial and logistical setback." Kalen could only stare. A setback. A god woke up and tried to eat an entire space station, and you're calling it a setback. The entity, as your preliminary report calls it, was a known variable, the man said coolly. A containable anomaly. Warden Valerius was managing the situation according to established protocols. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that Kalen felt a moment of pure, unadulterated awe. Managing it, he was feeding it. He tried to blow the station to cover his tracks. Warden Valerius died a hero, attempting to save his facility from a violent insurrection led by you, the man stated, as if reading from a script. That will be the official record. Protocol Cinder was initiated by your co-conspirators. Your reckless actions resulted in the destruction of a multi-billion credit asset and the deaths of thousands. You are not a hero, Mr. Jorick. You are the greatest mass murderer in recorded history. The pieces clicked into place. The survivors would be silenced. Pippa would be sent to a psychiatric facility. Hamasaki would be given a promotion to a desk job on a remote outpost where he could never speak of what happened. The story would be contained, sterilized, and filed away. The corporation would absorb the loss, bury the truth, and move on. "What do you want from me?" Kalen asked, his voice hollow. "Your silence," the man said simply, "and your expertise. That anomaly on Lament was not unique. Our deep range surveys have found similar readings, other moons, other dormant variables. They are potential sources of immense energy, power beyond comprehension. They are also, as you have demonstrated, immensely dangerous." He leaned forward. "We are putting together a new team, a research group. Its purpose will be to study these variables, to understand them, to learn how to control them and, if necessary, how to destroy them. Your experience is invaluable. You are the only person alive who has faced 1-1. It was the ultimate irony. They were offering him his old life back, the life of a scientist, a researcher, staring into the abyss. But this time he would not be looking for knowledge. He would be looking for weapons. He would be the corporation's monster hunter, their vanguard in a secret, silent war against the sleeping gods they intended to exploit. "And if I refuse?" Kalen asked. The man smiled, a thin, cold gesture. "Then the official record stands. You will spend the rest of your life in a black site prison so deep and so secret that not even the light will remember your name. You will be the villain of the story, a footnote in a corporate report." Kalen looked past the man out the viewport of the sterile room. He saw the endless, silent expanse of space, the darkness between the stars. He knew now what lived in that darkness. He had seen it. He had fought it. He could rot in a cell, a forgotten monster, or he could return to the abyss, a hunter. It was not a choice between good and evil. It was a choice between a small, forgotten death and a grand, terrible purpose. He thought of Bax. He thought of Corbin. He thought of the price of knowledge. "I have some conditions," Kalen Jorick said, his voice as cold and as empty as the space between worlds. The war with the old one was over. A new, quieter, and far more insidious war was just beginning. The end.